Hello and welcome to the final Weekly Stuff podcast of 2016 with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here for the last time this year to talk about stuff. Specifically, this week on the show, we're finally doing it. Our big end of the year episode, which we're going to focus specifically on the top 10 video games of 2016.
Yeah.
And I gotta tell you, Sean, I have rarely been as excited to record an episode with you as this one, because it feels like it's literally a year in the making, but I think from like May on, we have been excited and kind of scared of this topic.
Yeah, I feel it's something that I feel like we've talked a lot about on the podcast and even more off the podcast about how difficult it is going to be, just like even well before we had played a lot of the games and like saw how strong the beginning of the year was with surprises like Digimon Story, and then knowing all the shit that was going to hit in fall. And yeah, I feel like what my list was going to be in my head has changed so much over the course of this year, up to like the last moments of making the list, where like, I mean, one of the things I'm super excited about on just doing this podcast is we have not talked about our lists at all.
No.
So I have no idea what's on your list. You have no idea what's on my list. And I can say right now there are a couple of surprises on my list, at least.
And I think there's a surprise or two on mine.
Yeah.
There's a couple, I think if we tried to predict each other's lists, there's no way we could do it.
No.
Like, we probably...
There is very literally, there is one game you could not predict on my list, I'm sure.
That's wonderful. That's why I love this. So... You know, we are recording this early before you hear this, so we actually just recorded last week's podcast last night.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be out of town for a while.
Yes, I'm going on a little vacation.
Sounds fun.
Yes,
so,
recharge the batteries, so to speak.
Yeah, so this will be our episode for this week. This will be coming out around Christmas. I'm not sure when I'm going to release it. But yeah, so this is our last one for 2016, so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do our countdown.
Yes.
We're going to talk about all those games. We're going to do some superlatives, because I have some funny awards. You probably have some funny awards.
Yes, the annual tradition of there's a lot of games that I wanted to put on this list but couldn't, so I just came up with an excuse to talk about things I like.
And I also did some more traditional superlatives, like performance of the year. There's things I wanted to talk about in that zone, too. So there's some fun ones like that. That'll be how we kind of wrap that up. We'll talk about, I think, the year as a whole at the end, and just some memories from the podcast this year. And that's another year in the bag. So pretty cool. This is our 5th year of the show, episode 171.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and dive in, or do you want to do some overall thoughts on the year in gaming before we start?
I think we should just start, because I think everyone knows what our overall thoughts on the year in gaming are. It was really good.
I'll say this. 2 thoughts. 2016 was a piece of shit year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so
like monumentally piece of shit year.
For the world, personally, I had some bad things, and I think that's part of why the video games of this year impressed me as much as they did, is as with any good piece of art, they are escapism, but they also are a lens onto the world. They help you cope with what is going on. They help you remove yourself from what is going on. And it was an outlet that I think we really needed in 2016.
Yes, I mean, I think it speaks to the power of video games that on election night, when hell was about to rain on Earth, my way of coping with it was by turning on Dancing All Night on my Vita and just playing through some songs in that and zoning out and like kind of process. And then once I was done doing that, I processed the political climate through the lens of the ending of Persona 5. So it's
nice.
Like video games fill both gaps. It can be escapism and like intense intellectual material.
Absolutely. I actually played Persona 4 Dancing All Night a little last night to cope with the difficulty of making this list.
Yeah,
so that was a thing.
Similar stress levels, probably.
Yeah, but I will say I have been making top 10 lists for movies for 10 years now. This is the 10th year. So I've done this a lot, and this is the I've made gaming top 10 lists for the entirety of this show's lifetime, but this is the year definitely where I played the most games. There was the most to play in terms of, I think you and I can safely say in our coverage of the industry, this is the best year we've ever seen.
Oh, by far. Like, I've played way more games this year than I normally do in an average year. Like, I have spent a lot more money on games this year. It's one of the ways I know that for sure.
Absolutely. And the only comparison I have for this in movies in terms of the difficulty of making a top 10 was the year 2014 in terms of years I've covered. That was a year where I, out to number 20 on my movies top 10, I had things I was sad that weren't in the main 10. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of a similar thing with games this year. And then also just I had a 6-way pile up for number 1. Yeah. How the fuck do you break that? So anyway, some fun stuff. Any ground rules you had for your list or anything before we get started with that?
It was, it was a real gut kind of list. That was my main methodology, is that I kind of set the rules aside, that sometimes in a year where there's a lot more sort of like this game's not the best game in the world, but like I can use it, I can reasonably put it at the bottom of this list, like Halo 5 last year was on my top 10 games list. It's like, there's enough good about this game that I can feel good about putting it at like number 10, like, and stuff like that. Here, everything was so tight that at the end of it, I just looked at the list and was like, gut check, does this game in my gut, deep in my heart of hearts, do I like this game more than this game? And that was the only thing I had to go by.
And that is absolutely how I would describe it too. It was a gut thing where I was fretting over it until I looked at the composition of the 10 I had, and I was like, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like, that's my gut.
Trying to do the arithmetic of like, well, this game had this and this flaw. I didn't really like this combat sequence in this part of this one level.
No.
So that means that, like, you can't play that game with this kind of list.
No. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the countdown, the top 10 video games of 2000.
Before we get to my top 10 games, because I think you have your superlative list that is a little bit different than I have my awards that I want to give before we get to our top 10 games. And this is just
so you'll do your awards before and my awards after.
Yeah, your awards after, because mine are going to games that did not make the list, but had some specific quality about them, good or sometimes bad, that I wanted to recognize. And so this is something I did last year, and I think the year before that. This is also the largest section I've done. So this is not, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I just sort of want to recognize some of these games in a way that's a little more than just saying honorable mention, you know? Mm-hmm. So first up, I'm giving the Dude Award to No Man's Sky, because that is a game that it kind of broke my heart that game could not make this list, because I do love it so much. But it does have that quality of, in a lot of ways, just kind of made you go, dude. Both in like the reaction that people had, you're like, dude, and then in just the experience of playing the game, you're just like looking up at the stars, at the sky, at the infinite galaxy, and just going, dude. And that, like, the scale of No Man's Sky and its sort of ability to allow you to approach it and really kind of like grapple in a personal way with these large sort of philosophical questions of the scale of space and the difference of like your experiential personal scale of life and the scale of these planets and the scale of these solar systems, these scales and the scale of this galaxy. Like, that is something that is so valuable to me, and it is the sort of like the gameplay systems in that are not sort of built in such a way to fully encourage, I think, what the game was really good at, and that's why it couldn't really make the list at the end of the day. But it's actually a game I wanted to recognize. Next up, I gave the best whatever the fuck that thing is award to the Abject Flesh from Inside. Inside was the game that, like, if there is a number 11 on my list, it is Inside. Okay. That is the one that, like, when I got down to it, and people are maybe going to be surprised when they find out what my number 10 is that I just said that. But anyways, when I got down to it, of, like, these two games, of, like, is there any way that I make this list and Inside is not on the top 10 games of the year? Because it's really... Because I replayed it several months ago, sort of like in anticipation of this list, and it was just like, that game is really, really fucking good, and particularly that ending is amazing.
Inside was just outside my 10 too.
Really?
I have an
damn.
I have an award for it as well.
Okay.
Should I just give mine for that now?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a little different than mine. Mine went for Mindfuck of the Year.
Very similar.
Went to Inside, and I had a runner-up for a lot of these.
Okay.
So my Mindfuck of the Year was Inside, because I think the Abject Flesh, absolutely.
Yes.
And even before you get to that...
there's a lot of mindfuckery going on in that video game.
And I think a well-deserved runner-up for me to the Mindfuck Award is Virginia. Just the entirety of Virginia, and I had both of these. It was the entirety of Inside and the entirety of Virginia are 1 and 2 for Mindfuck of the Year. And neither of those made my ultimate top 10.
Man, I thought for sure Inside was going to be on yours.
I thought so too, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Like, this is where we are. That was one of the things that made me feel a little bit better about cutting it, was I was so positive it was going to be on your list.
I thought so too.
Man.
It's a hell of a year.
Yeah, Inside's a hell of a thing. That ending is a hell of a thing. People should play Inside. It kills me that Inside is not on these lists, because it's so... In another year, it would be like in the top 5.
Oh, absolutely. It is... just one of the grand achievements in indie game design these days, and I'm glad that it has come to all the platforms so people can play it. If you have not yet, you owe it to yourself. Set a night aside. Don't read anything about it. Just bask in it. It is not just on the level of being a mindfuck, but I think in its gameplay systems and its sense of pace and progression is a real achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's to you inside in your weird-ass ball of flesh. Next up for me is the best level gimmick, which is a tie, which goes to the Crack in the Slab mission from Dishonored 2 and the Effect and Cause mission from Titanfall 2, both missions from completely different games that came out within 2 weeks of each other that have the best mission in both of those campaigns are missions that require you to get an item that allows you to travel between a past version of the level and the present version of the level and solve puzzles, like very literal puzzles in Dishonored 2's case and more combat puzzles in Titanfall 2's case, by switching between these two timelines. And it is an amazing mechanic. It is a technological marvel. It is easily the best part of each individual campaign, and it's so cool to see that idea just sort of like somehow has been in the water or something, of like these game designers have wanted to do something like this in a complex 3D game, and then both these games did it, and they are so completely different kinds of games that the effect that each level has is utterly different. And that's also, this award is my way of recognizing the level design of Dishonored 2 is amazing, and the creativity in that level design is amazing, and Titanfall 2, similarly, the campaign in that game, while I have my issues with it, cannot take anything away from the creativity and the pure sort of level and game design variation that they had of, like, each time you approached a new level, they would throw some completely new crazy mechanic at you, and the craziest mechanic of all, by far, is just being able to time travel at will. So, yeah, best level gimmick. You're welcome, Dishonored 2 and Titanfall 2. You've earned it. Moving on, next up, I give my Please Make More of These award to Virginia, which also is an incredible mindfuck. And the reason I give it my Please Make More of These award is something we talked about on the podcast. We talked about that game. Is I just so desperately want to see more games like this that play with the kind of ideas of cinematic cutting that Virginia plays with, and it's such a sort of fertile ground for creativity in video games, and it's a space that feels like there's so much to be mined there in other kinds of genres and other sorts of approaches, and in shorter games and longer games and stuff like that. And I just want to see, I think an episodic structure for a game like that would also be very interesting, and see what that would bring to it and stuff like that. So that's, another Virginia was a really hard cut for me of something that I thought was going to be like my number 9 or 10 game. And then when I looked at all the games on the list and was thinking about this, like, nope, Virginia can't make it.
It didn't, yeah, but that's why it's my runner-up mindfuck of the year.
Exactly, yeah. It is a special game for sure. Next up, this is a slightly different kind of award. It's the I Like Shenmue award. I am giving it to Shenmue, a game that did not come out this year, did not come out this millennia, but... well, no, I guess it came out right at the beginning of this millennia, but I played Shenmue for the first time this year, and I like Shenmue. Moving on, the most bust-ass shit I can't help but love award goes to XCOM 2, a game that is broken in some really kind of spectacular ways on a technological level, but I really enjoyed playing it, and, like, it's such a weird thing with video games that even if I could have been incredibly frustrated in moments with XCOM 2, when I think back on XCOM 2 after like a month away from it, all I remember are the good things about it. And that says something about that game. So, you're a busted fucking game, XCOM 2, but I still love you, Next up is the most bust-ass shit I can't help but hate award, and that goes to XCOM Enemy Unknown Plus on the PlayStation Vita, a game which single-handedly sort of ruined my fucking plane ride to New York City, because it's a PS Vita game I bought specifically when I was about to go on a plane ride to New York City, and then I played it for a little bit, and I realized all the reviews were lying to me, and it is by far the most broken game I've ever played, in the sense that it is completely unplayable. So fuck you. It's not much of an award, but go fuck yourself, XCOM Enemy Unknown Plus. And then this is a really special one. I'm really proud to be able to give this award as the last special award I'm giving, and I'm giving it to Final Fantasy 15, and it is Miyuki Sawashiro's Award for Peculiar Excellence, which is an award that can only go to a game. And I've been waiting to give this award to a game ever since we started this podcast, but this is the only time a game has fulfilled all the prerequisites, which is, one, it needs to have the brilliant Japanese voice actress Miyuki Sawashiro has to be in the game. The game has to be excellent, and the game has to be peculiar. This is the only time I have played a game that has fulfilled all three requirements, and so there you go, Final Fantasy 15. I kind of hate you, I kind of love you, I don't know, but Miyuki Sawashiro is in it, and she's a really good voice actress, so...
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, I have a couple of these that I didn't know quite what you were doing. So I have a couple of superlatives that aren't like my main superlatives that are like yours.
Go ahead.
I'm going to do 3 of these, all right? First off is outstanding achievement in creating a very flawed game I really wish had been good enough to be on my top 10.
Okay.
And that is Recore for the Xbox One.
Right.
Because I really do think that is, I say outstanding achievement for a very specific reason. Because it is outstanding how much that game has to offer me specifically.
Right.
And how much I loved it. And how intensely I could never put it on a top 10 because of how unfinished and broken ass it is in parts.
Yeah.
And that is too bad. But, you know, it is a game I desperately wish had been good enough to be on my top 10. And maybe one day we will get Recore 2.
Yeah, or maybe we'll get Recore 1.
Yes.
The complete edition.
Yes. I'm just saying, if we can get Knack 2, we can get Recore 2.
Anything is possible in this brave new world of ours.
And then my 2016 game of 2012.
Okay,
which is my award basically for game that I didn't came out this year, but I didn't.
Your version of the I Like Shenmue award
is Gravity Rush Remastered.
Yes,
which is I think easily the best game to get a remastered thing this year, other than maybe Skyrim. But even then, I really like Gravity Rush Remastered, and it needed the remastering.
Yeah, it is
more
the
than
game.
Skyrim.
It is the best game that needed a remastering for sure.
Yeah, and so I just think, man, that is a great game. I think it allowed both of us and a lot of other people to discover it. It is one of our most anticipated games of 2017.
Yeah.
And I think this time next year we'll probably be talking about Gravity Rush 2 in some sense or another.
Certainly.
And, Gravity Rush Remastered, that is definitely the 2016 game of 2012. And if you have not played it yet, that is the way to play it on the PS4. It definitely deserves that award.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that.
And finally, this is the Special Jury Award for Outstanding Achievement in Addictive Game Design.
Okay.
And this goes to the game I had the hardest time leaving off my top 10.
I think I know what this is.
And this is Stardew Valley.
Yeah, your capitalist nightmare.
Yeah. Stardew Valley is a game I put over 60 hours into.
Good Lord.
And if you had told me at the start of this year that I would have not on my top 10 list a game that I put over 60 hours into and I left it off, I would say, what the fuck are you talking about? I must have really liked it, right? And I did. I think Stardew Valley is kind of brilliant in some ways. It is wonderful. It is relaxing. It is a beautiful place to be, even if when you start doing an alt narrative for it, it becomes very scary very fast.
Yes.
Ultimately, it did not have, I guess, what I would call the depth of the games I wanted to put on my top 10. It did not kind of fit the story of my top 10 and what I felt were the 10 games that represented this year to me. But I spent an awful lot of time relaxing while playing Stardew Valley and watching reruns of Gilmore Girls this year at the same time. And, you know, it is a very addictive game to the point where I opened it up last week to play a little more before top 10 time.
Oh, God.
And the task I had ahead of me that I had left is, so I had gone like 3 months without playing the game. And I came back and I was in late winter, because there's that season system. In winter, you can't plant your crops, but you're getting ready for the new season. And I had amassed the capacity that for spring, I could plant 1,100 crops, and I would have to hoe 1,100 tiles and plant all of those and take care of them. And I started the process of doing that, and it was like at the point where I had to get a pen out and start like figuring out what the diagram would be, I realized it was too much. And if I threw myself into this, I would never come out the other side, and you wouldn't ever hear from me on this podcast again because I would just be playing Stardew Valley and amassing an insane amount of wealth in this stupid little game. So
there is something so amazing about the idea of like there is no mechanism to automate all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Like I'm just waiting for the like massive like 30-page essay written about like the Stardew Valley and like Ayn Randian objectivism, you know?
Indeed. Yeah. No, my character in Stardew Valley is totally Randian because he does fucking everything. My wife, she doesn't even get to do shit. She just goes cheats on guys and has other people's babies, and I don't even apparently care because I have my farm and my animals. I mean, my kingdom.
1,100 crops is a lot of fucking crops, dude.
It's a lot of crops.
Yeah.
Like, it took up almost the entire space of my farm just to put the sprinklers down. And they give you a lot, like the kind of space where when you start the game, you're like, I will never fill this. I filled it. Anyway, so yeah, that is the special jury award for Outstanding Achievement in Addictive Game Design, and you could say my prospective number 11-ish thing.
Sure, yeah.
So those are the awards.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised. I thought Stardew Valley was going to be somewhere on your list also.
I did
too. I have no idea what your list looks like now. That inside of Stardew Valley were two that I was like pretty positive were going to be on your list.
Yep, me too, Sean. Me too.
Yeah.
So you want to go ahead and get started with the countdown?
Let's get started with the countdown.
So Sean, I'm going to go first.
Okay, go ahead.
We'll go back and forth as we always do. I do my 10, he does his 10, and we go back and forth like that. My number 10 game of the year is Kirby Planet Robobot.
Right, that did come out this year,
for the Nintendo 3DS.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, and I will say, I'm really happy I could find a place for this game on my list, because this is an outstanding game that people aren't talking about enough.
Yeah.
Because it kind of came in a very fallow year for Nintendo, where, certain things didn't go so well for them. You could say that. Yeah. Because it's basically the year where they went and hibernated before they awaken again in the spring with the Nintendo Switch. Yeah. But they released a couple great games, and Kirby Planet Robobot is one of the best I've played on the 3DS, and that is high praise because the Nintendo 3DS has been a fixture on these lists and a fixture of my gaming life ever since that console debuted. It's just been a pretty constant stream of great games for that system, including some really inventive platformers like Super Mario 3D Land. And Kirby Planet Robobot goes right to the top of that pile on the 3DS because it is such a creative and tight and perfectly realized game. Every single level is a blast, just this big, immersive, fully realized idea that you could tell every level was built upon some kind of central conceit, and they explored it so well, and the variety of the game is so high. If you've played other Kirby games, or even if you haven't, I think everyone's familiar with Kirby's powers. And I think the real masterstroke of this game is that Kirby doesn't just have his normal powers that he steals from enemies. And that suite of powers is here, and it's better than ever, and bigger than ever. All of them are so much fun to use. But there's this whole extra suite that they put in where he can take those mech suits, which have their own complete unique suite of powers, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. It's kind of like a game we'll talk about later today, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, that recognition of they have 3 or 2 rock, paper, scissors things going on at once. Yeah. And how that kind of starts to blow your mind because that's not how you're used to playing that kind of game.
Yeah.
The way Kirby Planet Robobot does that with the 2 suites of powers that complement each other is the same kind of thing. And just the way every level is so perfectly designed around those different powers with light amounts of puzzle solving, but also a lot of inventive ideas that make you consistently use those powers in new and interesting ways. This is not a long game. It's 6 worlds, each about 5 levels. But from beginning to end, it is just so constantly throwing new ideas at you and making you play this game in new ways. It is so surprising, right up to a long, positively insane climax that I believe I talked about when I first played this game, that I was so surprised they were able to pull off on the Nintendo 3DS because it is such a visual mindfuck of a final hour or so, and I didn't know that little console could do it. But the Planet Robobot proves the 3DS graphically had so much more power in it than I think we even thought, because it does so many things that are so beautiful. The 3D is honestly essential in this game because all of it takes place across multiple planes of depth. It's a side-scroller, but it still uses this backwards and forwards kind of thing in terms of planes of depth that is so interesting, and the ways protrude. It is just such a constantly gorgeous game. The music is some of the best I've heard in a modern Nintendo game. It just feels like the people at HAL Laboratories who made Kirby Planet Robobot swung for the fucking fences on this one as hard as they could, even though no one was really watching at that point. And part of that, and there's a couple of games on this list that are here partially because they were just such strong surprises. I don't think anyone, when that game was announced, because that game was announced 2 months before it came out.
Yeah.
And then it was out. It's I don't think anyone was expecting this is going to be kind of a modern platforming masterpiece. And it totally is. If you own a 3DS, if you have any interest in platforming or in Kirby, you owe it to yourself to play this game. It is so much fun. It is so aesthetically pleasing. It is a blast, and it is one of the games I have on here because it is just so purely entertaining, and it's probably the shortest game I have on this list. But to me, it's always quantity over quality, or quality over quantity.
Yeah. It's always quantity over quality with you, Jonathan.
Yeah,
God damn it!
No, that's why Stardew Valley is my number 1.
Exactly.
It was a sleight of hand. No, but yeah, Kirby Planet Robobot. I played it back in June, and it has stuck with me ever since. And I opened it up the other night while I was making this list, and just played a couple levels, and I was like, yeah. I would feel bad if I had some of these other games not on my top 10, but I would feel really bad if I didn't make room for Kirby.
Yeah.
So that is my number 10 game of the year, Kirby
Cool.
Planet Robobot.
Cool. This is kind of weird because it sort of has set up a little bit mine in that was a mech kind of game you played in June. My number 10 is a mech kind of game I also played in June. There's also something sort of special about this game because this is the biggest surprise on my list in that this is a game I have not talked about on the podcast that I played, is a game I've not talked about to you that I've played, is a game that, as far as I know, you don't even know exists, because this is not a game that even launched in America. It is a Japanese game that did get in. This is pre me playing games in Japanese, because it was over the summer, and it got an English localization in the Southeastern Asian territories that then I imported. It's a game called Gundam Breaker 3.
Okay.
And people may have noticed over the past, I would say, year and a half, Gundam references by me on this podcast have increased sort of exponentially.
Yes, they have.
Yes, it is a thing that has been happening because Gundam is a franchise I've always sort of been sort of curious about, and I'd seen some of, Gundam Wing and Mobile Fighter G Gundam were two shows that were popular on Toonami when I was a kid, and I watched those. But when I was taking Japanese classes, one of my friends in those classes was huge into Gundam, and he got me into Gundam and watching and I have basically seen all of it, which actually does not take nearly as long as you would think for a series that started in '79 because the different shows are pretty compact. But I have become over the past 2 years or so a really big Gundam fan, and Gundam Breaker 3 is just this game that came out over the summer. I think it came out in spring in Japan. I got it over the summer, and I just quietly was just on the side putting time into it as a relaxation thing because it is basically, and then and slowly overdoing that, I sort of realized how much I just came to love this game so much to the point where this is the game that most benefited from the gut check thing of I would just look at this and be like, this game has to be on this list somewhere because it is a game that is about sort of playing action figures in a way, in that it is about you making different mobile suits or Gundams through sort of this really insanely detailed, complex system that almost kind of reminds me a little bit of Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth or something in terms of the depth of this system that at first you just seem oh yeah, I just take the arm pieces from this Gundam and put it on the body from this Zaku 2 thing and then just put all these pieces together and make my own little mobile suit, and that's fun. And then you slowly start to realize oh, this game has literally over 1,000 different mechs from the Gundam franchise represented in the game. I'm someone who I have seen all the movies and all the series of Gundam since that this franchise has started in 1979, and that's a significant amount of content. And there are mechs in this game that I don't know where they came from. The only way I know where they're from, because they're from the manga spin-offs and shit like that of Crossbone Gundam that I don't know what that is, but this is a really cool looking fucking cape thing that this thing has. And so this game has actually through the this encyclopedia thing of the game, I've learned even more about all these spin-offs I had no idea existed. And what's special about the game is that sense of you being able to really just kind of make whatever you want to make, and it's something that when you first start playing the game, you think oh, it's about you kind of put these pieces together and make your thing, and then the real game is you going into these little missions and doing the combat stuff. Because there's this whole combat system that's not amazing, but it's fun. It's not super deep, but it's more than engaging enough. And it nails what it needs to nail, in that it feels like your Gundam very particularly is represented in the combat system in terms of how it moves and the different kinds of attacks it has that really sort of reflect how you built it out. But at first it was just yeah, you think for this kind of game usually it's about the combat system, and then the building the Gundam thing supplements that. And then the deeper you get into the game, the more you realize it is the other way around. This is not this is if Call of Duty was about you making the most amazing custom gun in the world, and then every once in a while you took it out on in a multiplayer match. But it wasn't about that. The only reason ever you did the multiplayer match stuff was just so you could unlock new shit and you could have fun spending hours putting this new different gun together. That is what this game is you go out and you do these missions and you fight these other Gundams, and then you get all their pieces, and then you go back to the base, and every couple of missions you say okay, I'm going to scrap what I have and I'm going to look at this fresh and just build something new. And I've spent probably 30 hours in this game just building different Gundams and not even engaging with the combat stuff, because the game just provides you so much in that you have arm pieces, leg pieces, a torso, a head, and a backpack, and you can have those intermixed with like anything you want, even if like the scale of them is completely ridiculous and in no way should work. Like you can have giant fucking legs, and then you can have like a little tiny Gundam F91 body or something, and just be like, okay, this is like the proportions of this is completely ridiculous, but it'll let you snap it together. And then you have a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, and then also you can put what they call option equipment on, which is just like, oh, if I want to make a big Zaku 2 that has 500 rocket launchers on it, and then when you are in the mission, you can just fire all these rocket launchers. You can just stick all these rocket launchers on him, and that like plays completely different in the combat stuff. And then you have all these different special moves that you can put on your Gundam, and that like depending on what pieces you have, it will unlock different moves of like, oh, if you have this piece that used like this sword in the show, then it will unlock that special move that sword used or whatever, you know. And so that allows you to sort of like really get the sense of putting these different sort of like pieces of Gundam history together into this really unique configuration, to the point where like if you are someone who doesn't know anything about Gundam, this game will do nothing for you because you will be completely lost in this massive pile of list. But if you do have that sort of reference point, and that you can look at a Gundam RX 97-2, and you can look at the Gundam Mark II, and you can tell the difference between those things without even thinking about it. Like this, you have this basis for which you can just build whatever you want. Because then even it's not just the gameplay stuff in terms of putting rocket launchers and stuff on it. It is like the level of like color detail you can put in on like all the different points of paint you can put on the individual pieces. So you can like paint the whole thing however you want, with like 6 different color options that are like represented different parts of the body, or you can go into the individual pieces and color them differently, and then there's like a 0 to 100 slider for like make it more metallic looking, make it more airbrush looking, make it look glossy, make it look like battle damage, like chip the paint on it, like put all the like dirt and shit on it. And you can do that either for the entire thing, or you can do it for individual pieces. So like one of the things I started doing while playing the game, that is one of the things that made me fall in love with it, is that you start sort of building up these personal narratives behind like, well, why does this thing look the way it looks? And after like a big battle in the story mode, maybe you go in and you say, okay, like I have these cool arm pieces, I'm going to put like these cool arm pieces on this one thing I had, but then I'm going to like make these all like weird and metal and kind of like dissonant with the rest of the design, and like because in your head it's okay, like these got broken off in this fight, and then you just like took what you had and put these new ones on there, and the game just sort of encourages that kind of like creative play, and it has this insane depth to it of just being able to create whatever you want to create. And so then I also have, so that's sort of like my pitch on like what the game is and why I like it. But then I also wrote, this is the only thing I wrote for anything on this list, but I just felt like, since I have not talked about this game at all and like kind of why I like it is really unique, I just want to read these 2 paragraphs I wrote about it. It is, when I was a kid, I didn't play games to beat them. In fact, when I was a kid, I didn't really play games the same way one doesn't play action figures. Instead, I played with them. Games were toys which provided a space to become Sonic the Hedgehog or Wolverine from the X-Men, or to run around an open field with a sword on my back and adventure on the horizon. The sort of imaginary games I would play on the playground could be made manifest through video games. However, as one gets older, one tends to lose the capacity to get lost in imagination, and books which were once magic portals become narratives. Movies which were once fantastical windows become films, and video games which were once brilliant, impossible toys become experiences to be completed. And that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that process of growing up, as it opens up whole new horizons to the consciousness. However, as a rather smart man once said, there's no point in being grown up if you can't be childish sometimes. And Gundam Breaker 3 made me feel like a child again, playing with these impossible toys, which moved and fought and flew before my eyes in ways an action figure only could in my mind. Through Gundam Breaker 3, these mobile suits, these Gundams, my Gundams, forged from my imagination, could be constructed to my most exacting desires. The systems built into this game to configure mobile suits out of literally hundreds of pieces drawn from the long history of the franchise are simply mind-blowing in their versatility, their ability to create what I want to create, and not be constantly hamstrung by the frustrating limitations that reality so persistently presses on the imagination. Gundam Breaker 3 is quite simply one of the finest toys I have ever played with, and that is more than enough for it to have a place on this list.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and move on to my number 9.
All right.
Which is Overwatch.
Very
Overwatch,
good video game.
Blizzard Entertainment. For a long time, like from a month after the game came out to like 2 weeks ago, I just kind of took it as a given that Overwatch probably wouldn't make my top 10. Because I thought, it's really good. I enjoy the hell out of it. but it just doesn't feel like it's something that has maybe the depth or the narrative around it that I kind of was feeling when I wanted to put 10 games together.
Right.
But when I started looking at all the games I had on my short list, and I started really thinking about it, I realized not just how good Overwatch is and how much I want to talk about that, but how much it was part of my gaming life this year in a way that feels like I had really been taking for granted that I wasn't going to put this on my top 10. Because, I play a lot of games with my little brother. That's something that that is one of my primary gaming experiences is different multiplayer games we play together. And, that's why I own an Xbox One. That is the only reason I bought an Xbox One was to play games with my brother over the internet because that's the system he bought because he spited me because I already had a PS4 and he decided to buy an Xbox One. So, I'm okay. That's okay because he wanted it for Halo and stuff. And ultimately, I'm glad I have that because we can still play Halo together over that.
Yeah.
But, from the moment Overwatch came out, I think back in May, to now, that has been our go-to game when we get online to play Xbox. And there's a reason for that. And I think it all comes down to why Overwatch has to be on my top 10 is that there were a lot of good multiplayer shooters this year. More than I think people are talking about. Multiplayer suites that I really liked, including 2 other games we might talk about later. Doom and Uncharted 4, which came out the same month as Overwatch. And to this day, I wish I invested more time in both of those multiplayer suites, particularly Uncharted 4, because I love that both of those multiplayers. I think they're unique. I think they're interesting. I think they're smart. But the one I keep playing is Overwatch. And that's why, for me, it's a real big presence this year. And that this was a game so good, it stopped me from playing other games I really liked. And that's kind of a rare thing to talk about.
Yeah.
It also fits into, to me, a narrative throughout our top 10 list that we're going to talk about, where I think there were many titles that managed this year to kind of crack a formula that seemed difficult for modern gaming, such as episodic gaming, or what does a modern FPS look like, or what does a next-generation racing game look like. And for Overwatch, it was managing to crack this ever-elusive idea of the multiplayer-only online console game, which the battlefield of modern consoles is littered with the corpses of those games, including this year shit like Battleborn and stuff like that.
God, right? Battleborn did come out this year.
Right? No one else, even the people who made it don't remember that. Fun fact. Yeah, but there's so many that they don't catch on, and not only did Overwatch catch on, it caught on as a full-blown cultural phenomenon, and I think that is worth exploring why, and it is at its core because it is such a good game. And I think, the last 2 weeks, my brother and I started playing it more because I came out of my cocoon of JRPG with Final Fantasy 15, and I could play games online again.
Yeah.
And we were playing Overwatch again, and I just started thinking about it in more critical terms and thinking about this game is on the surface so simple. It is so easy to pick up and play. I can go a month without playing this game, pick it up, and I have zero difficulty getting back into the controls of any character I like. If there's a character I've never played before, of course, that might be more difficult. But even then, you just pick a character and you start getting into it and you start feeling it. And I've never chatted with a team in Overwatch, and yet team play is still such a big part of it and still winds up being part of it. And every map feels like that old school kind of mid-2000s map design for multiplayer games that I think is kind of a lost art of where you just instinctively get it because the maps are so good and they just become kind of part of your memory of playing that game no matter how much you do it.
Yeah.
And these simple battle modes too, where the main thing in Overwatch is there's a car and you've got to get it from point A to point B. And I think if you told someone who hadn't played Overwatch that that's kind of one of 2 modes you're going to play in that game, they'd say, that game sounds like it doesn't have enough content. And anyone who's played Overwatch would tell you, no, because every time you do it, it's different somehow. Because you have this set of heroes, and you have to talk about the characters and the lore of this game, and that it is absolutely rich enough to support a story or an animated series or anything else Blizzard would want to do with it, but they chose not to, and it winds up being like the greatest window dressing ever on a game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting, bold choice to me, but it's also a big part of the game's appeal is that it has that personality, but those personalities are split into these 20 characters that all play pretty differently. You don't customize. There's no XP skill chain where you're going to get better shit for your character. It's all cosmetic, and yet the depth is so much greater to me than something like a Call of Duty multiplayer suite, where, you know, you're literally like putting all this shit on your gun and stuff. That does not interest me the way Overwatch interests me in having these concrete characters who feel like they are there and they exist whether or not you are there playing with them. And it is about you diving into that and getting to know them better and better, and that depth sort of reveals itself over time, and just how smart that gameplay design is. And also that the game, I think, is a technical marvel. It runs so solidly on consoles. It's another evidence that Blizzard is just better at getting games to run than pretty much anyone else. The online stuff, I've never had a problem finding a match or keeping a match going, or matchmaking online with my brother, which can be a bitch over Xbox Live a lot of the time. It is just a superlative game, and I think one of the last things I would say is it is one of the only, and I might have to look, maybe the only game on my list that is a new IP. And I don't want to take anything away from this year in gaming, because there were a lot of sequels this year, but they often happen to be super fucking innovative and awesome and amazing sequels that felt new. But Overwatch was truly new. New characters, new setting, new gameplay styles. Even its genre is kind of hard to pinpoint. It's not a MOBA, but it's MOBA-esque in some ways. It's not a first-person shooter, but you have a first-person shooter perspective, and some people have guns, even if those guns shoot ice. So what is this game? You know, and people embraced it, I think, in large part because of that newness and that it owned its newness. And, you know, I think you're probably going to see a lot of year-end superlatives of people calling Overwatch the game of the year. And it's weird. There's a lot of games I love this year. That's not something I'm going to object to, because I can totally see why that is something you would say, especially if you're trying to assign like a larger cultural narrative to things. Overwatch, I don't know, was kind of this shining ray of positivity of like a community thing in a pretty shitty year.
Yeah, and I think that is like, you know, I only ever really played the beta stuff, and like I sort of dropped in on some of the free weekends they did here and there for Overwatch to sort of check it out. And I do enjoy the game, but it is for me, like, while I'm not like super deep into the gameplay stuff, I'm not really big on that. I think the character design is amazing, but it is more that like sense of positivity and optimism that's inherent in that game. That is, at some point, it's sort of weird when you really think about it. Like, it is still a game where like all these people are shooting and killing each other, but like that's just sort of, when you're actually playing the game, that's not important. Like, that's not what's really going on there. And it is this sort of the diversity of the cast and the happiness of them, and just like them being these unique, weird people, and that just sort of being okay, and nothing is made fun of or looked down on in Overwatch. And it's just like this happy, positive environment with this happy, positive group of characters. Even if they are like really edgy, like Reaper, they're still like fun, goofy, edgy. You know, like they're not trying to take themselves too seriously. And I think the first-person shooter like multiplayer market needs more of that, because the only other game that feels kind of like that is sort of Overwatch's direct sort of inspiration, which is Team Fortress 2. And Team Fortress 2 came out in 2007, so it's been a while.
It's been a while that Blizzard was able to launch this new IP and make it feel so effortless after so much time since they did something new is amazing. Yeah, and that, you know, this really gives me the feeling I got like 10 years ago in the mid-2000s when I would play games in high school and middle school on my 360, like Halo 3 and stuff, before online multiplayer suites got so crazy, and it was just kind of this low-key, you drop in and play.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think has maybe gotten lost in the minutia of certain multiplayer game design, and I really hope Overwatch is kind of a compass forward for a lot of multiplayer suites, because I think clearly they know how to do this.
Yeah.
So that is my number 9 game of the year, Overwatch.
All right, my number 9 game of the year is Thumper.
Nice.
This is fucking, holy shit, this fucking game. Like, I don't even know. I talked about it a lot on last week's podcast, because after I beat it, and obviously, like, not a lot of time has passed. My thoughts have not changed on this game. But just the way this game sort of takes a very familiar sort of genre, like the rhythm game genre, that feels so well-worn, well-tread. You know what you're getting into. Like, there are 2 or 3 different kinds of rhythm games, and like, that's fine. But if you get a game that has a plastic guitar, you know exactly what that game is. If you get a game like a Hatsune Miku game, and you've played any of those, you know exactly what those games are. And like, you know, that the genre has felt really staid for a long time, and Thumper just comes in and kicks that genre right in the fucking ass and says, hey, there is way more we can do with this basic sort of gameplay conceit of playing with the music. And Thumper just says, like, let's not have it just be this fun, happy party time. Like, fuck that. Let's lock you in a dark, isolated room where you are alone, cowering and afraid, and let's just hit you in the face with drums for 5 hours. And, like, that will be, if not a fun time, it will be, like, a weirdly sort of, like, transcendental time or something. It will make you realize things about yourself you didn't know. And it's something where, like, with Thumper, it just feels like it is like the dark underbelly of rhythm games that was always there and you never knew you wanted, of like, let's just make it aggressive. Let's make it hard. Like, let's make it metal. Like, metal as fuck, but not necessarily in, like, ripping guitars, but just in, like, the sensation of it feels so intense. And it's a game that, like, just gets completely under your skin while you are playing it, and then once you are gone, like, I literally, after I beat the game, I had a dream of, like, being in that game, because it is so encompassing, it so envelops your consciousness, because it takes that thing of where, with a rhythm game, you are getting in the groove, you're with the rhythm of the music, and you're playing the music, and you're just, like, you're kind of like one with the game, because you're just in the zone, and it replicates that sense of, like, if you're someone who plays an instrument, like I play guitar, and you feel like you are playing a song really well, it's like your, like, consciousness is, like, on a different level or something, that you are just so in tune with what you are trying to do with this music, with this rhythm, that, like, your concentration is on a different sort of level and a different kind of plane. And Thumper takes that and then makes it so, like, you have to, instead of you, like, having to be on that level and being in the groove just to have fun, you have to be in the groove to survive. It is like a necessity in this game for your sheer survival. And that kind of twist in taking that genre and doing something so new and bold, and then also designing on it in such a sort of masterful way, where the way the individual tracks are designed are so clever and so unbelievable, and the way the game builds on itself and builds on its own sort of, like, musical ideas and musical phrases and complicates them and takes the rhythms you expect and sort of, like, twists them up and twists, like, what the time signature of the song is and stuff like that. What it does rhythmically is so sort of genius that Thumper is easily one of the best games I've played this year, and it's something that I am dreading and highly anticipating going back to that game and trying to S-rank some of the harder levels and seeing if that is something that is even physically possible for a human to do or not.
Nice.
So that's my number 9.
Your number 9. My number 8
yes.
is Fire Emblem If for the Nintendo 3DS, known in the United States as Fire Emblem Fates.
Yes.
But the title Fire Emblem If is way better.
Yes.
Can we agree on that?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. I mean, it's in no way marketable in the United States, but it is definitely better.
Yes. So Fire Emblem Fates, this is a really tricky thing to figure out how to even talk about, because technically this is 3 games.
Yeah.
And so there was Birthright and Conquest are the main 2, or in Japan, Dark Knight Kingdom and White Knight Kingdom, way better titles.
Yes.
But anyway, Birthright and Conquest over here, and you could buy either of them and get the other campaign as DLC. And this was not pussyfooting around like they redid a couple things. No, it was 2 full-ass Fire Emblem games. And then there was a third on top of that called Revelations, or
Black Knight Kingdom.
Sky Kingdom or something like that.
Sure.
I don't know. It's Kingdom of Dreams. I don't remember what it's called in Japan. There's a third campaign that was DLC on top of that. That's a third full thing. And so because there are technically 3 campaigns, this is me sort of breaking a normal rule I would have, which is normally I would want to finish a game before having it on here. And I guess technically I haven't finished this game. Because I played 2 out of the 3 campaigns. But that entailed me having 80 hours in this game, which means it's the most I played of any game this year, the most I've played of any game on the Nintendo 3DS, and would you say that's enough to rank it for your entries?
I am not going to sort of object to what you have done here.
Yes.
It is fine by me. I think it skates underneath the rules.
Yes. And, really the only thing I regret in ranking this before finishing all 3 campaigns is that it might rank higher for me at some point, because the one I haven't played is the 3rd campaign, which is sort of like the true ending. I should say I've played several hours of that, so I know kind of where they were going with the story, and I like it, but I just didn't have time to devote another 40 hours to it yet. And I kind of like that it's there, and I can go back to it someday and have more Fire Emblem. But it's an interesting thing where, going into this year, if I had to put money on, of the games I knew that were coming out this year, what do I think would rank highest on my top 10? I probably would have guessed Fire Emblem Fates. Because Fire Emblem Awakening is probably the best game on the Nintendo 3DS.
Sure.
It is maybe one of my 10 favorite games ever. And beyond that, Fire Emblem as a series is just, I've said this before, just on pure, sheer, satisfying gameplay. Like if you said, you can only play one type of game for the rest of your life, just with your kind of mind blank playing this type of game. What is it? And to me, it's Fire Emblem. I just love the specific type of strategy RPG that Fire Emblem games are, and the specific way they do it, and how on the 3DS, and I think with Awakening, how they were able to build that system out even more with heavier narrative and character stuff that made it even better. And Fire Emblem Fates is the direct sequel to Awakening, not narratively, but it's made by the same team for the 3DS. And so I was super excited for this one. And I'm not going to say I was in any way disappointed. It's just that, holy shit, this was a good year. And that is evidenced by, I have this at number 8 on my fucking list, and I adore this game. Yeah. That is not because I think there are deficiencies in this game. There are deficiencies. I think Birthright is noticeably weaker. It's a really good game, and it's a good Fire Emblem game, but it's probably got the weakest story of any Fire Emblem I've played. Some of the level design is a little rote. But then Conquest is one of the best. The story is so interesting and so dark, and the game is so beautifully challenging to the point where I beat Conquest with myself and my daughter in the back of the room still alive, and every single other person had died. And that's kind of the best way to beat a Fire Emblem game.
Yeah.
Like, I know, Sean, you really love the original Game Boy game.
Yeah, the first two Game Boy ones. The first two ones they brought over, which were on the Game Boy.
Yeah, but the Game Boy game that was over here called Fire Emblem, just Fire Emblem.
Yeah.
That's such a great game, and Conquest is specifically a throwback to that, because it's the same kind of thing where there's no world map. It's just chapter to chapter. Yeah. You don't get to grind. You don't get to do any of that other shit. You just have to play mission after mission, and it is grueling, and they have a story that really matches that gruelingness. So, if I wanted to narrow it, I could just say Fire Emblem Fates Conquest would be my number 8. But I do think, even if their choice to kind of go with quantity over quality for the sequel to Awakening diluted certain parts of the game, it's a like big swing that I am so enamored of, that I respect so much, because I think that overall tapestry design to Fire Emblem Fates, where constantly you make this choice early on, and then the rest of the game, it's not just that they've reskinned some stuff, it's that the entire arc of your character morally and of the fate of the world and of the characters you meet is different. And you see all these scenarios of what could have been, and then those specific moments where the games intersect. Part of why Conquest hit me harder is it's the second one I played, and going back and seeing some of those same narrative moments through that mirror, through the looking glass, is powerful, and I've never seen a game do it to this level. We've had branching paths in games since the beginning of time, that's just a thing games have done, but no game has ever tried it to the degree Fire Emblem Fates did it, to the point where there are 3 40-hour games, the soundtrack is 7 CDs and a full data DVD long, things like that. Like, it is a huge, beautiful, awesome production. It makes a lot of little improvements graphically and aesthetically to what Awakening was doing. It has, I think, improved gameplay in some ways. They do a really cool thing where when you're on the map moving your units around, instead of it having to fade to black and go into a battle screen, it just zooms into the map and you're on the map, and that's where the battle is happening. And it's a technological feat that's another thing where I don't know how they got that out of the 3DS, because it's super specific. Where on the map, there's a tree there in the 2D sprite plane, and then it goes 3D, and that tree is in the exact same place, and things like that are just so impressive and immersive. And I spent more time because of that watching my units battle than I ever have in a Fire Emblem game before.
Right, yeah.
Because at a certain point, you just have to start skipping it.
Yeah, at a certain point, you just go into the option and say, battle animation, those are cute. Let's just skip those.
Right, exactly. So things like that, and it plays so well. It is, if you like Fire Emblem, it is so supremely satisfying. I think the storytelling is very good. The best thing about it is the characters. The characters are just as good as you would expect from a Fire Emblem game at this point. And, if the overall game isn't as good as Awakening, on some level, it's because they kind of had nowhere to go but down. Awakening is just such the masterpiece entry in that series. And I look forward to whenever that next leap happens. This was not necessarily a leap game for Fire Emblem, but it was a damn good Fire Emblem game, and I am really kind of happy that I still have more of it to play. And I have so many fond memories of it, and the fact that I got a fucking 20-hour-long soundtrack out of it, that there are probably parts I still haven't listened to, is great, because that helps me get through the day.
Yeah.
So, great game. Fire Emblem, if you haven't played it, you've got at least 3 games to pick from.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to play. It's sort of almost terrifying when you think about, what sort of dark pact they made to put that game into existence, of it being that long, of just making 3 games at once.
Oh yeah, it had 3 different lead writers and things like that, and I do think you feel that a little bit, where Conquest is so tonally different, and I think so much smarter in how it handles themes, but still it's one of those things where, okay, I can recognize they spread themselves a little thin on this one, but they did it in service of this kind of thing I've never seen a game even attempt before. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and another just great entry for the 3DS in one of its waning years. So,
you can never go wrong with Fire Emblem. Man.
No.
It's a great franchise. This is one of those like games that like makes me every once in a while just eye that 3DS and be like, I should buy this. It's like, that's stupid. I don't even have time to play these games. I should buy it, though.
It's one of the reasons to be excited for the Switch, I think, which is that they'll probably all be on there, and I think I'm very excited to see what that team does with more of a console power behind them, because Awakening and Fates, what they get out of just the 3DS makes you think, like all the development teams that have worked on the 3DS the past few years have been working under just the harshest restrictions of like what you can do with that system, and they've gotten so much out of it. When they are able to like spread their wings and fly, I think we're going to see some amazing stuff. Like I think people who are worried about the Switch being underpowered, at least for Nintendo-made games, I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, speaking of spreading your wings and fly, my number 8 game is The Last Guardian.
There we go.
A game which features a large, bizarre cat, bird, dog, dragon creature that can fly. Though he can't fly at first because his wings are broken, but eventually his wings heal up, and then, man, fucking, when Trico flies, it is fucking awesome. And The Last Guardian is, again, like with Thumper, a game I talked about quite a bit on last week's podcast, and again, my thoughts have not changed on this game. It is still the same of, like, I am in complete awe of what Ueda and his team accomplished in creating Trico and this incredible sort of AI creation that allows you to, or kind of like forces you to empathize with it in a way that I've never empathized with a character in anything ever before. I said last week that playing this game is like playing co-op with your dog, and that is like, that's almost all you need to say about this game, because it is that sensation of playing co-op with a completely artificial character and having that feel like an utterly natural experience. And so it is that core of that game, and the relationship you build with Trico is this remarkable achievement I've never seen another video game do, and I'm not sure we'll ever really see another video game do again, because like what it took for The Last Guardian to come out and like the sheer amount of sort of artistry that has to go into creating the kind of animation work and sound design and everything, and the AI and all that stuff that goes into making Trico feel alive is just mind-boggling. But then on top of that, there's something I didn't talk about a lot about last week, is the sort of the more specifics of a kind of like what you do in the game, and the game as this sort of large kind of 12-hour long 3D puzzle platformer. And like that, the most remarkable part of the game is all the stuff they do with Trico, but the game is also amazing to me as a 3D puzzle platformer, and in the level design and the puzzle design and the graphics and the music and the animation and all the stuff that goes into the feel of the game and manipulating objects in this world and sort of having to sort of look around in environments and figure out where you're going next. It's not a like new kind of genre, but the way that Trico sort of interrupts that genre is so fascinating and makes it feel so unique and different, and the empathic connection that you share with the child you play as and with Trico recolors everything about how you kind of approach these puzzles, or it did for me. And it is the sensation of, it's sort of similar to Inside, of the tactile nature of everything in the world, where Inside, one of the most remarkable things about that game was that like kind of everything you saw in the environment that you felt like, oh, I should be able to grab onto this, the boy could grab onto and manipulate it in a way that the thing had physics and momentum that felt right. The Last Guardian is very similar in that you look around this world and everything that you do, like kind of all the puzzles you solve, or about very tactilely manipulating something about the environment and swinging on a chain or grabbing a box and pulling it over here, or like pushing this minecart. And it doesn't feel like a lot of games of like, oh, you like a Legend of Zelda thing of, oh, you kind of like go up and press A on the box, and then like Link sort of like latches onto the box and like this very sort of stiff attached animation, and your like animation locked to the box in this like specific angle, and that is all you're on. Instead, it's like, no, like the boy is grabbing onto this thing, and it's like this big heavy minecart thing, and he's pulling it, and his like feet are kind of like slipping on the pavement, and then it catches and he pulls, and he very slowly moves it at first, and then he can start kind of getting momentum and is dragging it, and then you're on a slight incline, and so as you're going down, you feel you're dragging it more and more and more, and you realize like, oh shit, and you let go and you jump out of the way because because the thing starts barreling past you, and the physical presence of everything in the environment is so immaculate, and that's one of the things that makes the puzzle aspect of the game incredibly satisfying to sort of engage with and manipulate. And a lot of that goes to two things about the game that I think are people have a lot of trouble with, and kind of a lot of people are criticizing heavily, and I get one perspective on it, and that is the movement and the camera controls are not conventional. And in some areas, I think in particular the camera, there are some things where like straight up the camera like will get stuck in weird spots if you are kind of behind Trico in a tight corridor, and like it's just like a camera problem. But beyond just sort of like that happening every once in a while, which is sort of excusable because like fucking every game has that problem that is dealing with tight environments and like large characters.
And I think it's also worth saying it's one of a number of games this year that we'll talk about some others where camera controls became part of the discussion again. And to me, for better or for worse, and to me mostly for better, that's a sign of games being really ambitious again.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a good thing. Like that's people having this new technology and going so far with it that maybe it doesn't work all the time, but fuck it, they're doing something with it.
Exactly. And what I was saying about like everything in the world having this sense of momentum, I think the things that like the people don't like about the movement in the camera of the boy and the camera around the boy and the movement of the boy himself is that it is not like this super 100% snappy kind of motion that most games just immediately go to, because that is like the most sort of responsive thing, and that like responsive is that one of like the 5 buzzwords like immersion that everyone wants to say about every single video game, or wants everyone to say about their video game. And instead, this game says, like, no, fuck that. Like, these things have weight and momentum to them, and that goes down to even the abstract concept of the camera itself has this sense of weight and momentum, and that the camera does not want to move. The camera wants to stay where it is, and when you push the stick, it doesn't move immediately. It kind of slowly starts to move, and then it moves a little harder. And there's something about that at first it's really like kind of unsettling, because I should also say I've never really played Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, so I don't have that frame of reference. I don't know if those games controlled the same way, but I've never played a game that had that kind of camera movement. And at first I was like, oh, that feels weird, and it's like, it's not like I don't know how to move because I'm not getting the camera to move where I wanted to go, and it's just like a very strange feeling. But as you play the game more, you get this sense of like how the camera needs to move, and it kind of makes you not want to fiddle with the camera in a way I kind of found almost relieving, of like, you kind of like the camera that sort of settles where it wants to settle, and then it kind of sticks there. And it does, I think I don't know if this is true, but it felt like there was something that they kind of programmed that like the camera kind of more naturally rests at angles that are slightly more cinematic. Like I found like the like frame being sort of organized in like the rule of thirds and stuff in like a way that like video game cameras don't usually do unless it's a cutscene, and like every once in a while I would notice it and I was like, oh my god, like this is a beautifully framed shot of like the boy right here in the left third of the shot, and then like in the background you can see Trico like looking up to the right of the frame in the right third of the shot. I was like, what the fuck? Like you just don't see this. Shots framed like that, and the camera just kind of naturally rests there, and it is something where I think, like I said, every once in a while that camera will get stuck in weird places, and it can get a little frustrating when it's like that. But what the camera sort of accomplishes on the other side of that, of what it can do with this more cinematic sense of movement and weight to it, is so fascinating. It's something I want to see other games play with. And then also the boy himself, I think I have never enjoyed running away from something more in a video game than playing this game and being the boy and running away from the enemies in this game, which are these sort of like ethereal suits of armor that chase after you in certain sections and grab onto you, and then they will like take you to this like ghostly door, then like just take this boy kicking and screaming into like the ethereal eternity or whatever the fuck is on the other side of this crazy ghost door. And that's one of like the weird kind of the game never answers the question of like, what is behind this door? That's like game over is behind that door. But when you are like have to deal with that, the boy has no way of fighting the enemies. Like if you get Trico into the area where the ghost soldiers are, he can fight them. But you are like this little like 8-year-old boy, you can't do anything against them. So all those sort of
they don't Lara Croft it. Have a bow and arrow?
Yeah, you don't get a bow and arrow. You don't like shoot one of the ghost soldiers and just be like, oh my god, I took a life, and then you just gun down 50 more of them. And it's like, why are all these suits of armor filled with Russians? Like, how did they get here in this crazy tower? But yeah, like you don't actually fight them. You just have to get Trico there and have him fight them for you. But there are a lot of puzzle sections where you have to run away from enemies. Like one of my favorite ones is in a very late game section where you basically have to get into this little underground area where Trico can't fit, and you're kind of in this big donut. And you have to kind of run around and hit all these switches, and as you're hitting switches, the room starts filling with more and more soldiers, and so you have to find a way to sort of dart through the middle of the donut and kind of jump across gaps to get to the other side where some of the switches are, and lure the soldiers, and they're just running around in this loop, and they designed the AI in such a way that the soldiers will deliberately kind of go around and try to cut you off at different passes, and the circle is so tight that you can't see around the corner at all, so you're just like running to the next switch, and then all of a sudden you run face first into a soldier, and when that happens, it highlights maybe in a game filled with like some of the best animation work I've ever seen in this industry, what is maybe my favorite animation in the game I have ever seen, which is when you are running full speed in one direction as the boy, and then you pull the stick in the other direction. Most games would handle that in one of two ways. Either a lot of modern games like Witcher or Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that they're very animation priority heavy, would have you kind of, instead of just turning on a dime, which have you sort of like do a little tiny like arc and turn around and have the character turn around that way. Some games will, if it's a more arcadey game, he just like turns around on a dime on the spot and goes that way. Other games like in Uncharted would do like you run and then they'll do a really nice animation where you sort of like Nathan will like land on his right foot and sort of put his weight there and then pivot to the left like he's playing basketball or something. The boy is not Nathan Drake. He's this little clumsy 8-year-old boy. He doesn't know how to run well. So when he runs and you're running face first into something and you decide, oh shit, I need to go the other way, and you just pull the stick back the other way, he just like puts all of his weight back on his like back and just falls like on his ass and just scrambles onto his knees and just starts running in the other direction. And it is so, like, I have seen like kids I'm sure I have in real life like done this, of where you don't, when you're a little kid, your movements are awkward, you don't have full control over your body, and so you're just weirdly clumsy, and so you do that of where like you just kind of like one part of your body is moving in the direction but you haven't pivoted the rest of your weight yet, and so you just fall over, but you're also so small and lightweight that you just kind of like bounce back up, and that sort of like really scrambling nature of just like, oh shit, and like every time you're running away from something, every time you're turning around, you're like falling, slipping, tumbling on all this stuff, and it has, like I said, it has this very tangible presence in the world, and that is something that is so important to creating the general aesthetic and feeling of the game, because this whole game is about that kind of like core aesthetic, because it's not heavy on like big story stuff. It doesn't have like a shit ton of exposition. It is all about just you in this tower, moving through it with Trico helping you out and sort of building that relationship with him and having this very physical, tactile presence in the world makes all that actually feel important. And so, yeah, The Last Guardian, I think, is for like 100 reasons I haven't even talked about yet, is just an unbelievably brilliant piece of game design that breaks a lot of conventions. Some of that is wildly successful. Some of that like has made some people very angry. And like when people don't like this game, they get angry about liking it in a way I don't fully understand. But in a way I can also kind of see it as like this game challenges what you kind of expect video games to be and what video games you expect video games to offer you. And the game is not afraid of just saying like, no, like we're not going to make the camera the most convenient thing in the world. We're not going to make Trico the most convenient thing in the world. We're not going to make moving the boy the most convenient, responsive thing in the world, because that's not what makes this aesthetic work. It's not what makes you have this connection to this world. It needs to be clumsy because life is clumsy, and this game is about, if nothing else, it is about life and the relationship between different life forms. And I think it's just every part of the game's design, whether you love it or not, is solely aimed at sort of creating that sensation. And to me, it nails it 100%.
Awesome. This is the game I most regret I did not get to this year.
Yeah.
Although, here's a crazy thing, Sean. We've both talked about 3 games. Neither of us have played each other's games yet.
Yeah, no.
Like, you've dabbled in Overwatch, but you don't own it or anything.
No.
So it's like, and it's going to continue for a couple games. So this is nuts. I mean, I wish I had played The Last Guardian, but I also don't feel bad that I didn't get to it, because there was a lot this year.
Yeah, like similar with me with like Fire Emblem is like, I wish I could have had time and like had the 3DS to play it, but like I was playing my own shit too.
Anyway, I love the whole idea of this game existing, and you know, it is, even from afar, I never like arguments where I think when people get too far down on a game for flaws or differences of ambition. Yeah. Because I think that's a good thing. So,
this game is nothing if not insanely ambitious in what it tries to accomplish.
So, you just talked about a game that is, beautiful and ethereal and kind of makes you reconsider gaming and all this stuff. I'm going to talk about a game that's just fucking awesome.
Okay, sure.
And my number 7 is Forza Horizon 3.
All right.
Easily, and I hope more people realize this, the best exclusive money can buy on the Xbox One, at least in terms of new games. Not like
I guess that sort of spoils that Gears of War 4 is not on your list.
No, Gears of War 4 is not on my list. I tried to come up with a pithy award for it, and really it just comes down to, I like Horde, but I'm not sure it's any different than other Hordes. So, there you go. That's my review of Gears of War 4. It would not place in my top 15.
You didn't give it your I Like a Horde award?
I should have done that.
Yeah.
There you go. But no, Forza Horizon 3, man, this game is just fucking awesome. And I could, if I wanted to just be kind of snarky and bypass everything else, I could make the argument that this is kind of the best game of the year. Because just in terms of, here's how I would describe it. I just thought of this. It's kind of the Doom of racing games.
Okay.
Spoiler, we're going to talk about Doom later.
Yes, we are.
And one of the things we'll talk about with that game is just how perfect that game is in terms of mastering the mechanics it goes for. And Forza Horizon 3 is the same kind of feeling to me, where my biggest complaint with this game remains there are times where I can't tell which trees I can and can't hit. And that has been my one complaint since September, and I have played countless hours of this, and that's kind of amazing that a genre that is often so flawed, that continues to be my biggest complaint. And by the way, that's not a significant complaint.
Yeah, that is, for me, that is how you mark the progress of video games, is what kind of shit can I run over in a driving game and what kind of shit can't I yet.
Exactly. And to be fair, most of the trees you can hit.
Yes,
so it's great.
Good.
But no, Forza Horizon 3, everything about it is just so good. I've talked about the graphics to death. It is one of the most beautiful games, if not the most beautiful game I have ever seen. Its evocation of a digital Australia is a wonder to behold, and I think a statement to why we play video games, because again, it is much cheaper to experience the wonders of Australia on your Xbox One than it is to buy a plane ticket and go to Australia in a number of different ways. One day I aspire to go to Australia. I don't have that resource right now in my life, so it is beautiful to explore it in this way, and just the depth of that open world and how alive it feels, even though it's a racing game, so you don't get out of the car, and it's not like the streets are teeming with people or anything, because that would get really bloody really fast.
Yeah.
But it still feels like a living, breathing version of Australia with dynamic environments, and the lighting and the color in this game, if you know anything about what I look for in cinematography and the kinds of movies I like and write about, the way this game masters how light plays with clouds in a sky and how light breaks through clouds and the kind of dynamic colors you get from the sky, those are the kinds of things I love. And I don't think I've ever seen a game even try to tackle it to this degree, let alone pull it off on this level, where this is a racing game where so much of my time I'm spent looking up at the sky. And that is such a beautiful, powerful experience. And then when they added the Blizzard Mountain DLC, which I just finished playing last night in terms of I got to the final race, even more beautiful. They one-upped themselves. The Blizzard Mountain DLC is the best thing in the game, the best DLC I've played this year. It's just, that alone just adds to the value of this game and bumped it up at least one slot on my top 10, I will say that. And I just found it so addictive. But so the visuals are great, but the actual driving, which is something I have not talked about much, it is so easy for a racing game to either feel so shallow there's nothing to it, or so needlessly complex you don't really want to engage with it. And Forza Horizon 3 finds this beautiful middle ground that's just right, where I'm constantly feeling like I'm learning new things about driving in the game, and I'm getting better at it, and like my time with it rewards me by becoming better at it. But it's also a pick-up-and-play racing game where it feels realistic and arcadey in a way that is very easy to just get into and feels intuitive, and you can tinker with those cars to your heart's content, or you can just choose never to tinker with them at all, and either way is a pretty valid way to play that game. And the customization options and all that is such a blast. And again, what I go back to over and over is that the game so desperately wants you to have fun. There is no other game this year that I played that so desperately wants the player to have a good time. Because the whole story is you're this dude or chick who races cars, and you come to Australia, and there's these people who love you for no clear reason, and they have set up an entire festival that is basically there just so you can make the continent of Australia your fucking playground. And they are constantly setting up events, and everything you do earns you tens of thousands of fans, and you open up new things things to do, and the variety, even if it's technically just a few different types of events, there's races with a couple different kinds of races, there's these bucket list challenges that let you do crazy things, there's these speed traps and the drift zones, and that's kind of the 4 big things, but the variety constantly feels high, like you're not just doing the same thing over and over again, in part because just driving around in the world is fun and rewarding because of certain skill systems they've put in place. So the game just wants you to have fun. The radio stations are so good, and when a game like this has good radio stations, that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Down to having a great classical station, which not enough games have.
Yeah.
You need that.
It's a lost art.
Here's my second complaint with the game. The DLC did not add songs to the radio stations, and I was a little disappointed in that. But then I was like, I really like these songs, so fuck it, whatever. I can, if I want to put on new music, I can.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Forza Horizon 3, so great. And the last thing I need to talk about is it has maybe the best use of online functionality to date in a game I've played this generation in terms of how smooth and fluid it is. Because, I think when most of us think of like open world online play, to me at least, I think of how Grand Theft Auto 5 is a janky-ass piece of shit that they should get sued over because of how much it doesn't fucking work.
Right.
And I wish people in the media talked about that more, that it is a broken-ass piece of shit in its online mode, and no one talks about that because it's Grand Theft Auto and it's beyond criticism. But Forza Horizon 3 doesn't have those kinds of problems. And there are other open-world online games like Need for Speed Rivals.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That is my reference point for like racing games with shitty online stuff.
Yes.
Which is crazy because like Burnout Paradise did that in 2008 and Burnout Paradise did it like marvelously.
But like Need for Speed Rivals, there are other racing games in recent years that have done that kind of always online thing, and it's just so annoying. And the way Forza Horizon 3 handles it is you always just have your own instance of the world. It is loaded on your Xbox, you are playing, and it starts you, just default, you're offline, play to your heart's content, do whatever you want. There's nothing that'll get you if you're not online. But if you want to go online, you have all these different options. You can just go into an online free roam and maybe you'll find other people to race with. You can go into an online kind of competitive space, or you can set up individual online co-op spaces where you and this is the best part of the game, where you and your friend can go around and progress in the game's quote-unquote campaign together, and everything you do kind of counts together. And it's so good because you continue having your own like separate instance of the world where if you decide to go online, it doesn't have to kick you out and load. It doesn't have to like repopulate everything. It's just you keep driving, and in the top of the screen it says we're working on it, and it'll let you know when it's done and you're ready to play online. And it is so seamless and so easy to use and so easy to play. I think they cracked how to do open world online multiplayer, and I can only pray the people making Red Dead Redemption 2 have looked at this.
Yeah.
And have figured out how to do this, because if it's another GTA 5 thing, I can't handle that, and I will have to like burn that game. But anyway, even if the campaign is good, it makes me hate it. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
But yeah, Forza Horizon 3, it is so much fun. And again, talking about games I play with my brother, this is the other game with Overwatch that has just like not only become one of our default online games, but we've kind of played it more and more as the weeks have gone past. Where like you were talking about your Gundam game earlier, and that you started playing it.
Gundam Breaker 3, please.
Gundam Breaker 3, and that over time you like played it more and more.
Yeah.
I feel like that game this year for me is Forza Horizon 3, down to when that Blizzard Mountain DLC came out. I was so excited to play it, and I kind of have been playing it non-stops for the last few days. And it's been such a blast to have. And I think it's a game that I've honestly liked and respected the more and more I've played of it. And that's not what a racing game is supposed to do. It's supposed to get repetitive and boring.
Yeah.
And this game does not get that way to me, in part because of the graphics and the controls and that sense of it just wants you to have fun. And Forza Horizon 3, maybe this is one of those games that obviously it doesn't have a story, it doesn't have that kind of depth, but it is just such a good game. And I think it is easily, like, pound for pound, the best exclusive that one of our 2 next-gen consoles has. And that is worth something, goddammit.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So that is my number 7 game of the year. What's yours?
Awesome. My number 7, continuing the trend of our list having games that the other person hasn't played on yet. My number 7 is The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, the DLC expansion, add-on, whatever you want to call it, for The Witcher 3 that came out this year in spring. And this was one where, again, like the gut check version of the list is just like, I looked at The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, and it's like, fucking, there's no world in which I don't put this on this list, because it is easily one of the best things I've played this year. And like, if it was not inherently less impressive for what it was because it is more Witcher 3, it would be number 1 on the list, basically. But, it being more Witcher 3 does make it so it's like you know what to expect, so it doesn't surprise you in the way, in like every single facet of the game, the way Witcher 3, the base game, did when it first came out. But Blood and Wine is such a massive evolution of Witcher 3, and it's such a massive sort of add-on to it in the sense of like, it is everything. It is a new story. It is a new content. It is new side quests. It is like it is a new sort of thematic exploration, and it is a conclusion to the Geralt of the CD Projekt Red games. It is sort of a conclusion to his story and a reflection on The Witcher as a series and what that is and sort of what it has explored and what Geralt kind of means to people. And it was really fascinating for me. This is the first thing I played of Witcher related after I read the books up to where they have been translated in English, which is to the penultimate book, which stars a character named Regis, who is a vampire, and then Witcher 3 Blood and Wine brings Regis into the video game world in a way that is, if you have read those books, is just unbelievably perfect. And it opened up a whole new facet of these games to me that I didn't really know before, because I didn't know the source material of how they sort of approach that source material and they translate it and do new stuff with these characters. And The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine is just an unbelievably superb game in every element of its design. And it feels like we are such a far cry now from where DLC was, like in the equivalent period of the last generation, where DLC was such a new thing, and it was like every once in a while you would get something like Mass Effect 2 Lair of the Shadow Broker, but you were generally drowning in just the most dreadful...
You also got Mass Effect 2, whatever the fuck it was with that vehicle you drove around in.
Right, yeah, the like Hammerhead, or I think whatever it was called, Mass Effect 2 Arrival, which was their like hooked in Mass Effect 3 DLC,
awful.
which was fucking terrible. Overlord, that was the Mass Effect 2
Overlord,
one that had the Hammerhead vehicle in it. And yeah, like, but it was, we were just drowning in terrible fucking DLC add-ons in the last generation. It feels like this generation, starting with stuff like, you know, that's sort of a transitionary thing, but Last of Us Left Behind, which was one of my game of the years, their top 10 games of that year when that came out. And this feels sort of like that in that, you know, you want to know about like Geralt as a character in terms of like for story reasons to play The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, but as a story and sort of like the fundamental plot and everything like that and the characters, like Blood and Wine completely stands on its own. And you could literally, it would be kind of a weird thing to do because you have to own Witcher 3 to play this, but you could hypothetically buy Witcher 3, then buy Blood and Wine, start Witcher 3, and it gives you an option to, if you want to just play through the DLC stuff, it will start you with a DLC-ready Geralt that is the appropriate level, has appropriate gear, and you can just play through the fucking DLC if you want to that way.
Well, actually, if you bought the game now, you'd probably be getting the Game of the Year edition.
Yeah, that would have all that stuff. So you could just do that if you want. Again, like, I would recommend you just play through The Witcher 3 first, because there's no reason, like all that stuff is amazing, so there's no reason to skip it. But it does that, like, the fact that they make that available to you just sort of shows to their philosophy in designing the DLC, in that it is not a small little, and it's the same thing with Hearts of Stone, which is the smaller one that came out last year. It's not a tiny thing that sort of like hooks onto an existing thing from the first game, like fucking what Assassin's Creed 2 did it with its DLC of, you got to a point late in that game where it's like, oh, that's where we skipped like the 20th and 21st like memory thing, and we're on memory 22nd. That was kind of weird. And then they sold Memory 20 and 21 later, which both had like key story things in it that like changed the context of character motivations and stuff in that game. It's like an awful fucking thing to do. Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, it's this whole standalone story that in some ways sort of like thematically comments on the base game and the story in the base game just through its sort of relationship to it and it being just adjacent to it. But it does have its own interest in sort of building out this world of Toussaint, which is the county you go to, which is this beautiful sort of fairy tale world that has a dark underbelly and all the sort of political backstabbing and weird monsters and vampires and stuff that kind of rule this territory. But it is also, you know, you have all the dark shit, but then you do have the bright shit, which is something that, like, the core Witcher 3 game has almost nothing of. You get a little bit of it when you're in the Skellige Isles, but it is, I feel like, really appropriate with the Toussaint DLC of where they go, in that this is the swan song for Geralt. Like, CD Projekt Red has basically straight up said that even if they do make more Witcher games, they're not probably going to go back to Geralt. And so this game is a conclusion on his story, and there's something that to me is so thematically potent about the idea of he goes and he basically retires in this weird fairy tale land where like the monsters and the magic have gone, because that's the story of The Witcher 3
Right.
is the fantasy leaving the world, which is what like all great fantasy stories are about when you get down to it. And Geralt is a remnant of that world. He is one of the few remaining Witchers. His job is to kill monsters. And so him going to this beautiful wine country that also has like crazy giant vine creatures growing out of the ground and where vampires stalk the cities at night, him going and retiring to that world feels so appropriate, and him being surrounded by some of the characters from the base game and some of the characters from his past, like Regis, that you haven't seen yet but are his friends that have been on journeys with him. It's something that it gives you this sense of closure, and it gives this story a real sense of purpose and a real identity that allows it to stand on its own as its own thing, and makes it more than worthy of being sort of considered as a separate piece of content, because even just beyond the main story stuff, it is all the side content they build in the game is of the quality or even greater than of what you expect. I mean, one of my favorite side quests in all of the Witcher 3 stuff is the tourney side quest of Blood and Wine, which is it maybe arguably like the best Arthurian style myth that has been written this side of the 16th century. Like, it is so... And you know, I have an English degree from the University of Boulder that has a very highly accomplished set of medievalist teachers that, whether you want to discuss medieval literature or not, if you are taking English classes at that fucking university, you are going to read a lot of goddamn Canterbury Tales, and you're going to read a lot of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and there is something about them taking those sort of storytelling tropes of those Arthurian myths of like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and doing that kind of chivalric tale, but then having that very witchery kind of twist on it. That side quest is so perfect, and their version of this guy who is basically Sir Gawain, only instead of those stories being like, oh yeah, like he's this great person, it more kind of takes a almost like Wife of Bathos kind of thing of like, he's a great person, he's also like this misogynistic piece of shit that puts all these women on this pedestal of worship, but he like never really treats them as actual people, and like it kind of undercuts a lot of those traditions in the perfect witchery way. And all the story content in this game kind of has that feel of that it tackles new subjects that are appropriate to the new setting, but it does it with the sort of flair that you expect from the franchise. And The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine is just the sort of sense of catharsis and closing that I had at the end of that game, and the sort of the note they leave Geralt on, and the closing moments of the last cutscene in the DLC are such a masterstroke of storytelling, and it's one of the best ways I've ever seen a developer sort of like say goodbye to their character. And yeah, Witcher 3 Blood and Wine is absolutely one of the best things I've played this year, without a doubt.
It's funny. I played The Witcher 3 technically in 2016. I played it in January. And I've gone back and said, that's obviously the game of 2015.
Yes.
Obviously. And I will say, it's worth noting that 2016, amazing year for games. The depth and breadth of games this year was unlike anything I've ever covered.
Yeah.
And same for you. I don't think there was a game this year as good as Witcher 3.
Yeah, not for me.
I don't think so. And I kind of wonder if there will be a game this generation as good as Witcher 3, because I think that's just a pillar that almost feels out of time.
Yeah.
You know? And yeah, so it's just worth noting that I kind of love that there's DLC that allowed Witcher 3 to still have a presence, because I think it's going to cast a hell of a long shadow. And the only real reason I haven't played Blood and Wine yet is I want to read the books before I do it, kind of.
Sure, yeah.
Because I've read the short story collections. I haven't they're so good. I haven't gotten into the novels yet, but I just need to find the time, and then I need to find the time to play Blood and Wine. But it's kind of like with that Fire Emblem Fates campaign I haven't done yet. I kind of like the idea that it's still out there for me, and I don't feel in any hurry to play it, because, hey, it'll be there as long as I want, and they're not going to have another Witcher game for a very long time. So, right? Yeah. We're not expecting The Witcher 4 next year.
Yeah, like the next game they're making is like that Cyberpunk 2049 or whatever. It, like, that game's probably not... For all we know, that game's like a PS5 game at some point, you know?
Exactly. It's the last guardian of steampunk games.
Exactly.
All right, so that's your number 7.
Yes.
My number 6, and I want to point out, my 6 through 1 is the pile-up zone, where I really could put these in a hat, shuffle it, and just pull them out, and I kind of would be happy with the order.
Yeah, my list sort of works out that way as well.
So we're going with the gut and with the heart, but I want to make it clear, everything in this top 10 I think is a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it being a number 6 is not me putting it down.
No, yeah.
At all. My number 6 is Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
Well, that's a hell of a coincidence, Jonathan, because my number 6 is also Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
All right, I'll start with my thoughts really quick. But Infinite Warfare is, so many people have talked about this, it is 3 games in one. One of those games is utter shit, and that is zombies.
Sure, yeah.
One of those games is as meh as a game can be, and that's the multiplayer. And one of them is one of the greatest games ever made. And that, if you don't recognize why that's enough for it to be on a list like this, I'm not sure I can talk to you.
Yeah.
Because Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and when I say that, I specifically mean the 10-hour campaign mode, is just one of the grand achievements in its genre, in a year that had another grand achievement in this genre. And it's so amazing. I think the main takeaway, as you've said, is it has the best story ever featured in an FPS game. A sentence I never thought I would utter about a Call of Duty game.
Yeah.
Because Call of Duty games have shitty stories.
Yeah.
And this game has a very non-shitty story. It also does so many other things you wouldn't necessarily associate with Call of Duty in this kind of latter-day phase of its life. You know, it is innovative across the board in its level design and its visuals and its campaign structure and the abilities you get and the guns you use. All of that is innovative, I feel like. And it is a longish campaign, and it has time enough to develop characters and stories, and even to take things at a slower pace, where you have these side missions where they just get to kind of experiment with other game mechanics and other abilities and things like that a normal Call of Duty game would never get the time to take for. And again, on top of all of that, it layers the best story I've ever seen in an FPS, the best treatment of military themes I've seen in a video game, and a game that feels so necessary in this moment and at this juncture, I think, in the history of video games, of, I think, pretty actively reflecting on how video games look at, treat, and do and don't respect soldiers and the sacrifices of war. It is a brilliant, brilliant game. We had a whole hour-long spoiler cast on this last week, so I don't know how much more I have to say now, but I'm not going to spoil anything here. But you get to those credits, and you see what they're doing at the end of that game, and the only other thing I can say about this is a Call of Duty game in the year 2016 made my eyes well with tears at the end, and if that's not the biggest surprise of 2016, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's something where... It is something where I am still utterly baffled that, like, a lot of the larger gaming press has not, like, taken notice of what Infinite Warfare does, because I think it is something that it is so utterly superlative in, like, kind of every single facet of the campaign, but especially in the story, which is something you just don't look for in games. And I think it's for me, Infinite Warfare goes into my bucket of games that I have in the back of my head of whenever I hear someone, and a lot of times I hear this on, like, I listen to a lot of gaming podcasts and stuff, and whenever I hear some members of the gaming press sort of, like, put down the games that, like, oh, like, you know, most games don't have good stories, and it's like most, like movies generally have better stories than games and stuff like that. In the back of my head, it's just like that was true for a long time, but it is definitely not true anymore. And it's like when I think about blockbuster movies and I think about the storytelling in Infinite Warfare, it's like you've got Mad Max Fury Road and Infinite Warfare, and then you have everything else. Like, there's, like, movies, most blockbuster movies do not tell stories very well. Like, they can have good action and stuff, but they do not tackle complex thematic material in complex ways, and they don't do it subtly, and they don't do it in an economic fashion. Like, that's just not how most... Like, fuck movies. Like, movies is just, like, sort of like the go-to comparison that, like, every video game person has for whatever reason. But, like, anything, it takes an insane amount of talent in any medium to tell a story well, to know when to sort of lay it on and when to back off on, like, what things are important to say and what things are important to left unsaid. And those decisions are so critical and they're so important, and so many people making these things are so bad at it because it is so insanely hard to do well that it kind of boggles my mind that when something does it so insanely well as Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, that it doesn't get the attention that it deserves to get. Because when you think about storytelling in the first-person shooter genre, it generally is, like, insanely straightforward, insanely ham-fisted, it is short, and it is, like, unsatisfying. And even in stuff like Dishonored 2, that is maybe arguably not quite a first-person shooter, but is certainly a first-person game, even that doesn't, with, like, all the work that goes into the setting and all the care that goes into that side of the game, even they don't figure out how to fucking tell a goddamn story in their video game. And Call of Duty does it, and it, like, knocks it out of the goddamn park in a way that you have never seen this genre do before. And I'm saying all of that from a completely honest place. I do not feel like I am building this game up. It is just what it is, and it's the honest reaction I had at almost every single step of playing this game was, I cannot believe that they are managing to do this. I cannot believe that I'm sitting here and thinking about oh, man, it would be kind of cool if they did this one thing to sort of bring this thematic concept full circle, and then realizing, oh wait, they did that 30 minutes ago. That every single sort of test I could throw at this, and every sort of hypothetical while I was playing this game of if they did this with the narrative, that would be so good. That'd be such a great way to sort of develop this thematic point. But there's no way they would do it. And then I would realize not only did they do it, they already did it. They did it 5 minutes ago, and I hadn't even noticed yet until I was really kind of trying to analyze it and think about it. And it's something that you so rarely find in video games, and when you do find it, you tend to find it in stuff like The Witcher 3, or in something like The Last Guardian, or in something like Uncharted 4 that we'll talk about later, where those games have sort of established themselves as being sort of prime storytelling material, and that that's one of the things they really put themselves up on and pride themselves on. And Call of Duty just sort of snuck out this year and is up there with the best of them,
Yeah. It is nuts. It is one of the most underrated games out there.
Yeah.
And I think history is going to look on it very, very well.
Yeah.
Because I think if the right people are paying attention, I hope this is kind of a sea change for how first-person shooters in general, but specifically the military genre, which is still the prime genre in these kind of games, looks at this. And I don't need every shooter game to be a heavy exploration of the existential themes of life and death.
Right.
But I do think there's something about just pulling that apart, just the casual care this game takes to build its characters and make them feel like real people who are doing a real job, who have sort of real wants and desires out of the scenario they are put in. I have not seen that done in this kind of game.
Yeah.
And man, Call of Duty fucking nailed it this year, and both of us have 5 games above it.
Yeah.
Which is insane. This is one I had it drafted higher, I had it drafted lower. This is a crazy year.
Yeah, it is something where it is. I mean, you look at it it is where all you can really consider is the single player stuff, because it is. Because for me, it's not even the multiplayer being weird or in the zombie mode being on there, and I never even played it. Drags it down or anything. It's
no,
not even a part of the discussion. But there is another thing of Infinite Warfare. We talk a lot about this story. That is also one of my favorite things about Infinite Warfare is just the thing that you would expect Call of Duty to have, and you kind of come to Call of Duty for, and fucking Infinite Warfare has it in spades in a way that no other game I've played this year has it, which is just sheer fucking production value.
Oh yeah,
and it's just being this technically super sound game that runs at a great 60 frames per second, looks phenomenal, but then also just the art design of their future world and some of the places they take you in the campaign of I think my favorite level visually is the one where you are on the asteroid that is just spinning, and the skybox on that level is fucking insane because there's just a sun that is whipping around like crazy because actually you're the one whipping around like crazy, but that's how you see it. And the way they sort of depict space and the aesthetic of being in space and of just, all the sound design of getting into your starfighter and things clicking into place and your engine powering up and then shooting out into space and little bits of space debris plinking off of your windshield, and just that sense of just the aesthetic of being there in that spaceship is so palpable. It's fucking awesome.
It's fucking awesome. The attention to detail is so intense that a couple years ago I was in Oregon and I did a tour of an aircraft carrier, military area, which I highly recommend doing. That's a really cool thing to do.
I've been on a tour of an aircraft carrier as well.
And the way they build the Retribution, your ship in Infinite Warfare, made me have these intense flashbacks to being on that aircraft carrier that I haven't thought about in years.
Yeah.
But it's the attention to detail of just how the doors work and everything. It's yes, that is exactly how the U.S. military would build a spaceship.
Yeah.
And just things like that where they clearly, so much love and care went into every part of this game. And some of that is not surprising at all for Call of Duty, because if you can rely on nothing else, those are technically sound fucking games.
Yeah.
But I think it went above and beyond there, above and beyond in terms of gameplay, and way above and beyond in terms of story. And that overall package is so much more than a simple summation of parts.
Exactly,
It's an amazing, amazing game. Yeah. All right, so that was your number 6 and my number 6.
I also love that was the first game that both of us played on each other's list, and it was in the exact same spot. There's something weird about that.
We do not plan these things.
No,
it's
we
crazy. Don't. My number 5, I think we're going to break again here.
Yes, definitely.
Is I Am Setsuna.
Okay, yeah. Another game I did not play it.
Known in Japanese, again a better title in Japanese, as Setsuna of Sacrifice and Snow.
Yeah.
Way better title.
Kenya to Yuki no Setsuna.
Yeah, way better title.
Definitely.
Anyway, but I Am Setsuna, if you have not heard of it, it's a game for the PS4 here in the United States. In Japan, it was also a Vita game, but it's only on the PS4 here. And it was made by a little studio that Square Enix started a couple years ago called the Tokyo RPG Factory.
Which is the best fucking name for a development studio. It's so dark and so amazing at the same time.
And the Tokyo RPG Factory, their specific kind of mission statement is to create sort of throwback 90s JRPGs. And they did that here. I Am Setsuna is in the style primarily of Chrono Trigger, although there's other things that are taken from the Final Fantasies of that era and whatnot.
Yeah.
But like it literally, it's the Chrono Trigger battle system and it borrows it verbatim and things like that. And yet it is so much more than a trip in mere nostalgia. And I will say this was by far and away the hardest game for me to place on this list. Because there were points this year where I wanted to put this at number 1. There were points where I could put it lower. And it is because this game has a quality to it that is so indefinable, I am at a loss for words in describing it. And the number one thing that comes up in thinking about that is the music. Spoiler for some of my superlatives later. This game has easily the soundtrack of the year to me. And this is a year where we had unbelievably good game soundtracks.
Yeah.
So many of them, and so many games that, like, here's something. All of my top 5, I will say, are driven in one way or another by music. And that's kind of how I figured out what goes in the top 5. Because if there's one thing in Infinite Warfare that doesn't stick out to me as much, it's the music. And maybe that's the only way I broke that tie and got it at number 6. But I Am Setsuna has a solo piano score where, other than a little bit of percussion in the battle theme, everything you hear is one dude playing a piano. And that's the whole score. And it is one of the very best scores for anything I have ever heard. I listen to it all the time. I specifically listen to it when I need inspiration. I have had days where I'm at work and I'm at a loss to figure out how to overcome a creative hurdle, and I put on the I Am Setsuna soundtrack, and it's like an awakening. This soundtrack means so much to me that on strength, it is hard for me to separate the game from the soundtrack, and if I separate the game from the soundtrack, I can't like put it at number 1, and that's where it's at number 5. But if any game is driven by its soundtrack, there is no game I have ever played that is as driven by its soundtrack as I Am Setsuna. But that combines with some other things. Like I said, there's a quality about this game that is so indefinable that when I think about it, and I was playing it the other night, again, to just try to refresh my memory, that is so moving and aching, and it makes me love it so much. And when I think back on the game, the word that helps me define that quality is the word atmosphere. The game has this tone and atmosphere that is so all-enveloping from start to finish. And a lot of that is the music, which creates this very specific, mournful tone. But it's also the graphic design and the just very carefully focused storytelling, where sometimes I think there's narrative missteps, but overall the story is about this world that is dying, it is overrun by monsters, it is perpetually winter, and every couple of years, to stave off the monsters a little longer, a young girl has to go sacrifice herself at the edge of the world. And that's the plot, and they don't reinvent that plot. They stick to that from beginning to end in a way that, and I think because it's a 20-hour JRPG and not a 60-hour JRPG, they have license to kind of stick to that. And you are this character who is initially, in a very sort of Snow White style way, you are sent to kill her, but you realize you don't want to, and you wind up joining up with her and being her main guardian. Setsuna is that character. You are not. Setsuna is the main character, but you are playing as her like guardian Endir. And you get this group of characters, and you're going to the end of the world. It's kind of like a much more tonally focused Final Fantasy X. That is also kind of the plot to Final Fantasy X. This does not have Blitzball in it. But anyway.
It doesn't have some fuckwad with like stupid pants going, "This is my story."
Anyway, no, it does not. It has no voice acting at all, which is part of what makes me love it. This is one of those games that would not work if it had voice acting. It has to be text, and it has to be silent. It's a silent movie kind of thing, a silent game kind of thing. And just like I was saying, the art design, so you have this world full of snow. And one of the weirdest criticisms I've ever seen of a game is people saying the game is too like monochromatic because it's all snow. And to me, it's like, that's the game. That's why it works. That's because everywhere you go, the world is dying, and there is this overall sense of snow and isolation. But what makes the game work is that atmosphere, that it is mournful, but also hopeful. There is this core idea of beauty in a dying world that is part of this game, where you see these moments of unbelievable beauty, sometimes in spite of the darkness, sometimes because of the darkness. You have this piano score that is mournful, but also sometimes happy and constantly beautiful. And so it is about this constant dichotomy between the darkness and the light, and between these horrible things going on and this beauty in the world, that these characters are on a quest to try to hold on to that as much as they possibly can. And I don't think there is any game that has ever affected me just on sheer atmosphere as much as I Am Setsuna. And I've talked about before, when you get to the ending, this has one of my favorite endings in any video game ever. How they kind of stick to their guns and what they do with the ending. There are some things that kind of complicate the story along the way, but the way they come back to the core of what this game is, and the specific image that the game culminates on, is burned in my retinas. Like, it is haunting in the best way possible. And this game, it hit me in the fucking gut. And, you know, there are things that are less remarkable about it. It, you know, doesn't reinvent the wheel. This is one of the few games on my list that I don't feel is, like, innovative in some major way. It's the Chrono Trigger combat system. And that's a great combat system, so there's nothing wrong with that. It's really fun to play. But, you know, that's not the best thing about the game. Some of the dungeon design is not necessarily amazing. There are moments where I think the storytelling is a little slack. But all of that just kind of gets erased for me by the unique things this game does. And it makes me so excited to see what this studio does next, because this was such an artistic home run for me. And I think it's such an interesting idea that Square Enix is devoting the money to let this little team make what are technically throwback RPGs, but are really kind of indie games in a weird way. Like, using the mechanics of old RPGs to tell modern-day artistic indie games. That's a cool idea. And I hope to see more from them. And if you have not played I Am Setsuna, you are missing out. It is, you know, some of the best $40 you will spend this year. And one of many games on this list that shows that Japan is in a really good place for game development at the moment.
The Tokyo RPG Factory is alive and well, and it is pumping out some good shit.
Yes. So I Am Setsuna, just, if nothing else, go on YouTube and listen to the soundtrack and just bask in it, because and I know for me it's just something where I like piano a lot, and I think it's a really bold thing to just say, fuck it, you're going to play a 20-hour game where all you hear is a piano. But I kind of love that. I think that kind of simplicity is something I would like to see more of.
Sure.
So that is my number 5 game of the year, Setsuna of Sacrifice and Snow.
Awesome. My number 5 game is also a game coming from Japan. Is also a game you haven't played. It's weird how that is how our lists are the exact same, but are completely different. My number 5 game is Dark Souls 3.
There we go.
A game I fucking just love to death, and I died a lot playing this game. It's something where Dark Souls 3 was a game that originally I actually had way lower on the list, and then. But it's also one of the oldest games in terms of when it came out in the year on the list I've played, and so I had to be I'm just trying to get the sense of what was I feeling all the time playing Dark Souls 3, and I just went and I YouTubed a video of what is, my opinion, the best boss fight in the Dark Souls franchise, which is the Abyss Watchers fight, which comes in the Fair and Keep section in Dark Souls 3, and it was just I loaded up a video of it and just saw the opening cutscene again, and the music played, and I saw that the room and the boss, and my memories of the entire game just came flooding back in this really extreme way, and I was like, oh right, that's what this fucking game is. This game is for someone like me who I have played all these games, and the only one I never finished was Demon's Souls, and the franchise is this weird thing of where it kind of just builds on itself in weird fits and starts, and it's this idiosyncratic kind of franchise where it starts with Demon's Souls, which is a bizarre PS3 exclusive game that I still almost don't even understand how it came over here, because it so seems like the kind of game that would only have come out in Japan, and I played 20 hours of that when I think it was on PS Plus or something on the PS3, and then never kind of got all the way into it. And then I moved on to Dark Souls when after, I heard people talking about it and having so much fun with it. I was like, okay, I'll give Dark Souls a shot. Because I liked Demon's Souls. I just couldn't get all the way into it. And then I fell in love with Dark Souls, played the shit out of that game.
This is one of the longest running threads on our podcast.
Yeah. It comes up because it's the most bizarre annual franchise in video gaming history. It's kind of like Assassin's Creed is a similar way of there's no way that this game should work coming out every fucking year. They're so specific and obtuse and strange and so hardcore. Like, they are not a like big like explosive like annual hit the way that Call of Duty is. Like, they sell 1 million copies or something, but they're not like, they don't sell like 10 million copies, you know. But yeah, Dark Souls 1, loved it to death. Dark Souls 2 is a really good game that I have some like severe issues with, and like moves things forward in the Dark Souls formula and takes some steps back in terms of, I don't love sort of like the way the levels connect together is like weirdly sort of artificial, where Dark Souls had this like great sort of like fully connected world that wrapped around on itself in ways that was sort of mind-bending in some ways, and kind of just like, it always felt like Dark Souls, you came around a corner and you all of a sudden you realized like where you were in the world in relation to everything else, and like you go from the state of being lost to finding yourself again in Dark Souls over and over again. That is sort of one of the parts of the magic of exploring that world that Dark Souls 2 loses, and I really didn't like that. And Dark Souls 2 is actually, Dark Souls 2 is about as long as all the other Dark Souls games, but the pacing is really awkward, and there's a lot of bosses, and it feels way longer than it should be. And so I didn't love Dark Souls 2 so much. And then the next one that came out in the lineage was Bloodborne, which is a game that has, obviously, that doesn't even have the Souls thing in it, which is the loose, like, sort of title justification of how Demon Souls and Dark Souls are connected. But Bloodborne is the PS4 exclusive. It was my second favorite game of last year. And that took all that stuff, and then that made it like the game really aggressive, and the combat a lot more fast-paced, which I loved. And then I love the Lovecraftian setting of Bloodborne, which is, I think ultimately I still like Bloodborne more than Dark Souls 3, and part of that I think is I just love that setting so much, and is very much a personal preference kind of thing. And so after all that journey of like this sort of franchise evolving in weird ways and sort of like having these weird offshoots that really have no literal connection but are like mechanically speaking nearly identical, like the menu design in Bloodborne is literally the exact same menu design in Dark Souls, just like with some like slightly Victorian thingies on it instead of like some like dark fantasy thingies on the boxes, you know? And so they come back sort of full circle to Dark Souls 3, and they announced well ahead of time that this was going to be the last Dark Souls game, if not necessarily the last game that is going to be in that style. But coming back sort of after that journey to Bloodborne, and then coming back to the Dark Souls universe, and like going back into that story, and there are direct references in Dark Souls 3 to things that happen in Dark Souls 1 and 2, and characters from Dark Souls 1 straight up show up in Dark Souls 3. And that was sort of like interesting, because generally the stories in these games are so obtuse, and like you're in the dark about everything. You have no idea what anything means, or you like if you want to understand what the story of Dark Souls is, you have to watch like 3 2-hour videos on YouTube of different people like reading all the fucking item descriptions, saying like, and this like thing is, if you look at this and see where it is in the environment and realize like, well, this must mean that this guy was like the handmaiden of the Dark Sun Gwendolyn, and who was the child of like Gwen, and he was like the leader of the gods, and he killed this dragon dude, and this dragon dude was like Seath the Scaleless. It's like fucking I don't know how anyone gets the shit out of those stories in those games. But what Dark Souls 3 does off of that is that it is way more direct in some ways, but is still like sort of backs off enough that you still have to discover a lot of what the game is about. And Dark Souls 3 is a game about cycles, which is what sort of a lot of ways these games have always been about. But Dark Souls 3, in being the last game in the Dark Souls cycle, like in our like the like literal actual world, sort of gives it this narrative place of being able to say like no, this is like the actual end. Like Dark Souls 1 is like the world is sort of sputtering out, and then you rekindle it and bring it back to life if you choose that ending, or you can let it go to darkness. But of course, like, you rekindle the fucking fire, because if you don't, then Dark Souls 2 can't happen. But like, you know, like this story in this game sort of builds off of that, and then finally is saying like, no, like straight up, this is actually the end. Like, it's not just that like the world is sort of sputtering out and you need to rekindle the first flame or whatever. It's like everything is basically fucked. And we realize that like us rekindling the flame is just prolonging this like insane despair that plagues this world, and that like death is not final, that everything dies and comes back just destroyed and decaying, and that like you need... this whole franchise has been prolonging this end. Both like literally the games have been like, we really need a Dark Souls 2 that quickly after Dark Souls 1? Like, should this franchise have just ended with the first Dark Souls? And then in the sense of the game, it's like, the whole process of the game is you are going through this process of what your character in Dark Souls 1 did, and then you realize what like all these characters throughout like countless millennia have been doing in this world, of going and sort of taking all this power of these different souls that date back to antiquity, that have been passed down through basically reincarnation, and using that energy to sort of bring life back to this world. But you can't bring it all the way back, because it is a little bit less each time, and it's a little bit more decayed, and it's a little bit just sort of more diffuse. And that finally, I feel like the story of this game is you saying, like, no, things have to end definitively for something new to start, that you can't just keep prolonging it. And there's something fascinating about a franchise sort of taking that and diegetically putting it into the theme of its game of, like, we can't just keep on making Dark Souls games. They make us enough money, and apparently they can pump them out quick enough that it's good enough for them. But, like, creatively speaking, it has to stop, and something has to be born completely new that can't just be sort of theoretically rising from these ashes. It's like the ashes have to be there, and you sweep the ashes away and you walk away, and like it's completely definitively done. And what Dark Souls 3 manages to do with that kind of story is that it manages to sort of echo all the stuff from the past in an amazing way of you stumble upon areas that you're like, this is the Tower of Latria from Demon Souls, which is like one of the best levels in that game, but like it can't be, because that is a completely different like setting and timeline, and like quite literally it can't be, because if it literally was, there would be copyright infringement, because that's the copyright owned by Sony. And so it's like, it can't be the Tower of Latria, but it echoes that. And then you stumble upon a place that's like, there's all these Victorian buildings, and you're like, this is just the city from Bloodborne, but it's not, but it's close. And it's like, and then there's like, oh, this like this place from Dark Souls 1, or it's like this character from Dark Souls 2, but it's not quite, it's just similar enough. And it gives this sense of like history to that world of like, this stuff has just been happening fucking forever. And there's a billion towers of Latria out there. There's a billion dead fire keepers under the Firelink Shrine that you stumble upon. There's a billion Victorian cities that have been swept away by old gods that are long dead. And this world is just, we have to finally put it to rest. And so it's that sort of like interesting thematic undercurrent in Dark Souls 3 is what really defines it to me. And that culminates in, well, it doesn't culminate because it comes early in the game, but it's sort of like, it's defined for me by the Abyss Watchers, that boss fight that I was talking about to sort of open this discussion, which is a boss fight that, depending on the order you tackle things in the game, can come very early. And it was the first big boss I encountered in the game. And the lore behind the Abyss Watchers and why it feels so sort of perfect to me is that they are this group of different people that are these brilliant warriors from thousands, millions of years ago that were fighting against this force called the Abyss that has all this sort of like lore implications in Dark Souls 1. That's not that important. But basically the Abyss is this corrupting force. And it kind of is very similar to the stuff from Princess Mononoke that like corrupts the boar and that kind of stuff. It's a very similar kind of aesthetic quality. And so they are these group of knights that have been fighting against the Abyss, and they are also one of the groups that rekindled the flame a billion years ago in the way that like your Dark Souls 1 player did. And so you need to kill them to get their soul so that you can do that again and sort of like walk that same path and go through the same cycle. And so you come upon their lair, and when you go into their lair, you find that they are all undead, because everything that dies in this world comes back undead and comes back corrupted. But they are all undead in this massive chamber, and there's basically, you see one big guy undead standing in the middle, and he's got like these glowing black eyes, and then he's fighting another Abyss Watcher, and it's these two Abyss Watchers fighting each other, and this really tragic music starts playing, and you go in, and they're just fucking killing each other, and then one of them kills him, and the cutscene ends, and then you have to fight this guy, the guy who's left standing, and while you're fighting him, more other Abyss Watchers start coming back to life, and you think like, oh god, they're all going to start fighting me, but they're all just fighting each other. And so while they're fighting each other, you kind of like, one of the main strategies for dealing with that boss is to try to get some of them to kill sort of like the main one that you need to kill and get his health bar all the way down to sort of finish them all off. And so you sort of do that, and you're doing that dance, and you're killing them, and it's this really weird, like really somber boss fight that gives you these kind of strange emotions, because it's just like these, all the lore has built up these guys as this legion of people that like have fought together and are like, you know, bound brothers by blood of this pact of defeating the Abyss, and now here they're all just kind of slaughtering each other for eternity in this room in front of the Abyss. And you finally kill him, and you take his soul, and you go back and you talk to a character who sort of like gives you a bit of an explanation about what they are, and you kind of realize like what has happened to them is they are these brilliant warriors that were fighting the Abyss, but as they were defending against the Abyss, slowly they became corrupted by it, and they are just like locked in this undead eternal dance of killing each other because they are the Abyss, and they can't see it in themselves that they are the problem, that the only way to fix this is by destroying themselves. but they see it in each other, so they are just fighting each other for eternity, and you finally put them down, and it is this brilliant, melancholy metaphor for Dark Souls, of like for the themes of this game. It's like, it's not just about, you can't just kill that guy, and that doesn't just fix the problem. You can't just kill this thing and rekindle this flame. That doesn't fix the world. Like, you are part of the problem. Like, you are just a part of that cycle, and the only way to end it is to end everything, like, all the way down. And like that sort of like getting that thematic design through the game and through the music and through the cutscenes and through the actual gameplay, and then having that culminate in that sort of like emotional impact of where you come back to your base and sort of give the dude the soul so that you can go on the next step, and you realize like I just like that, those guys are me, and like were my character in 100 years, you know, like that's like I have just killed these people who saved the world 100 times over or whatever, and then they were locked in this way of like they have just been disposed of and thrown away and locked in this room where they just kill each other for eternity. And it's like, it gives you this motivation to like, and that was the moment where I was like, okay, right, like this is like, if they don't give you a like true ending option, this is the game where I pick the dark ending of like, nope, not rekindling the flame, fuck this shit, I'm done. Luckily they give you like an ending that's more than just like feels like you're evil, but it's like more sort of like thematically poignant. But that was, for me, that is what Dark Souls 3 was, and it's a brilliant game and a brilliant climax to that franchise.
Awesome. And I know when you first talked about this game back in like April or whenever it came out, March, you weren't, I think it must have grown on you, because I know you weren't quite as like effusive about it.
Yeah, it's something where like when you sit on it and you like think about like what happened in that game and like the memories you have with it, you kind of get, because like one of the things that happens when you play these games is you can get very frustrated because they are very difficult, and like once that sort of like sits in the background and you have a lot of time to think about like, you know, like what did it mean that they were fighting each other, and like have like really sort of considering that they have these really deep, complex themes that are communicated in very subtle ways that you have to sit on these games to get them, because it was the same way with Bloodborne. Like, as I sat on that game more and more, I realized how much I really loved it. So brilliant game.
All right, so that was your number 5. My number 4 game of the year, Sean, is Doom.
Okay.
Doom, all caps. Every time I write the title, it's all caps.
It has to be. I mean, because if it's not, it's the Doom that came out in like 1993.
Exactly. And I feel like instead of talking about it, I really should just open iTunes and like play a track from the soundtrack, because I think that gets across everything I have to say. But let's get down to it.
Yeah.
Doom is a game that is all surface. It doesn't have like the depth of storytelling or theme that other games we're going to talk about have. But when that surface happens to be the single most playable, addictive, and rewarding first-person shooter gameplay I have ever seen, brought to life against an insanely accomplished backdrop of visual heavy metal world building and a crazy hard rock score and the best gun suite you are ever going to find in a fucking game, that surface is so much richer than most depths. And that's what I keep coming back to with Doom, is this is, and I do think this is kind of the most perfect game of the year, in that you can kind of push on any part of it and it doesn't give an inch.
Yeah.
It is just so well designed. Every level, every gun, every combat encounter, every fucking guitar sting. This game is just like opening your goddamn vein and having heavy metal just sucked right into it. It pumped right into it. It is so good. It is so all-enveloping. It's the kind of game that, like, when I realized at a certain point, oftentimes I play games with my dog near me and she'll be like on the couch or something. I had to make sure I wasn't doing that with Doom, because I would get so into it, I'd forget where my dog was, and sometimes she'd get scared by the music, and then I'm like, oh shit, I should probably know where my dog went.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that. And I'd have to like wait until she was asleep or something to play Doom, and then put on headphones and then just go crazy with it. I mean, Doom is a game I liked so much, I played it twice in a row. I finished it and restarted it and played the whole thing again, more completionist. I'm not sure I don't know what the last time I did that with a game was, where I just straight up, I'm like, I'm going to play this again because it's so good. It is, if not the best first-person shooter I've ever played in terms of campaign, it is the only serious competition Halo Combat Evolved has ever gotten from me.
Yeah.
And I think it does a lot of the same things that game did well in terms of having a campaign where every level feels like an event, every level feels like its own thing, every gun feels like it has such purpose, the story is sparse but so well told, there's an overall aesthetic that is so powerful, and just Doom being a game that came out in the year 2016 and gave so few fucks about what the conventions of shooters in this year was. It's like, no, we're not going to have sprint. You run full bore everywhere.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to have reload. That's stupid. You're going to blow some shit up, and then that's it. You're just going to reload on its own.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Or it doesn't reload at all, because that's how the logic of Doom works.
Exactly.
Or, we could just have you melee a dude, but no, they're going to go into this glory kill state, and we are going to have an astonishing number of animations for you to brutally murder these demons.
Yeah. You're going to knock this dude on his ass, twist his leg around, and stomp his head in with his own foot.
Absolutely, and it's not just there to be kind of cool or funny or whatever. It's a core gameplay mechanic that is like this constant cycle of you do it because it's awesome, but it's awesome because it gives you rewards, but it's it's like it goes back and forth. And the game just builds and builds until you have this perfect last couple levels where you have everything, you are fully decked out, and you are going to go to war with hell itself. And you know who's scared? Not you, it's the fucking demons.
Yeah.
Doom is fantastic. You're going to find out very soon that I'm going to talk about the tiebreaker that was the hardest thing for me on this list. I'll talk about that in a moment. This was a hard game to place. These top four are very close to me in some ways. But man, Doom, just one of the best games in its class ever made. And if you have not played it, I think it's still like $20 on the current PlayStation Store sale. I mean, we're releasing this a week later, so maybe not. But you have to play Doom.
It's so good.
Unless you're like mortally afraid of gore, in which case I get it. But other than that, Doom is a must-play, and it is, we have talked so much about it, I don't even want to get into too much depth about just how smart this game is on a gameplay design from every single level. We've talked about that plenty.
Yeah.
But it's worth repeating just, id Software came out of hibernation after many years without making a Doom game, and they just dropped the fucking mic.
Yep.
So that is Doom. That is my number 4 game of the year. And talking about it makes me want to play it.
Yeah, it definitely has that effect. So my number 4 is Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, which is... And then it should say, looking at this list, these top 4 games, I suspect it's similar for your list, are, just the most, in many ways you could put them in any order, and this is just the way it felt most right to me, because these are all fucking 4 amazing games. But yeah, number 4, Uncharted 4... we talked a lot about this game when it came out, because it is a game that is so worthy of discussion in so many ways. I mean, I wrote a fucking review for this game, and it is something where it is such a remarkable achievement for a AAA game to have the kind of restraint that Uncharted 4 has of being able to say, you know what, we're not going to have that much combat in this game. Not really. When we do have the combat, it's the best combat this franchise has had, but we are going to have just as much walking around and exploring as combat, and you'd never see a blockbuster game have that. You rarely even see indie games really do that. If an indie game does that, it's because it has no combat system to speak of. And, that's an easy way to make that decision, is just say, Gone Home. Gone Home doesn't have to make that choice, because Gone Home has no combat. It takes serious fucking balls to be Uncharted 4 and say, we're going to build out all this combat stuff, and then we're also going to put Gone Home in this game too. And we're going to put Gone Home 3 in this game also. And we're going to put multiple sections of just building out this story, building out these characters, building out this world, telling small stories in this larger narrative that reflect in really smart ways on the larger narrative. And then also sort of tell the swan song of one of the best modern characters in video gaming, Nathan Drake, and his supporting cast, which is the best supporting cast in modern games. And it was something where I remember back when they announced Uncharted 4 for the first time, and how much I felt like, you can't do another Uncharted game. Uncharted 3 was the conclusion. And then how wrong I felt when I was playing this. Is nope. They were right. They were fucking right in the way that is one of the reasons why when they announced Last of Us Part 2, I'm yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, you were fucking right last time. And it is, with Uncharted 4, it is such the perfect conclusion that I have no idea how I couldn't see that this is where this goes, right after I finished Uncharted 3, and thinking, foolishly that was the end of that tale, and that, really, it does have to come home with Nathan really having to face his past, face his family, face who he is, and make that last step, and having... And really, to me, Uncharted 4 is encapsulated in that epilogue section of sort of, the choices that they're able to make in terms of the storytelling choices they make, and saying, no, this does not... We have a last boss fight, but that's not the big last thing that happens in the game. We don't do the last boss fight and then the cutscene, which is how every other Uncharted game ends. We do the last boss fight, we do a cutscene, and then we have Gone Home 4 in the game. Then you're playing as a whole other character, set in the future, exploring this whole new environment, and having this beautiful denouement that's not how video games end themselves. They end with the giant boss. That's how fucking all these video games end. All the Uncharted games end. All third-person shooters end. Fucking Gears of War 3 does not end with you killing the queen and then it cutting 15 years in the future and it's Marcus Phoenix as like a fucking dad with his son and then playing on the beach for like 30 minutes. That's not how those games do that. But Uncharted 4 is the game that says, fuck it, we're doing that. Like, we don't care. We've built up the trust with Sony, we've built up the trust with our audience, and we've built up the skills within our studio to say, this is a different way to make these kinds of games, and we can have the spectacle be as great as ever been. We can have the combat be as great as it has ever been. We can have the puzzle stuff be as great as ever been. We can have all that stuff, and we can take our time with it, and we can tell our story, and we can do our characters the way we want to do it, and we can take our time and do it right. And you know, Uncharted 4 it is the best action-adventure story in video games in the way that is like the best action-adventure story in anything I've seen, the way it blends all those elements together, it blends the characters, it blends the mystery plot, and it's just a truly remarkable achievement for video games, kind of like all the way down, and it's, you know, the latest in a long line of incredible hits by Naughty Dog, pushing that sort of storytelling side of the franchise and of the industry forward each time they come out, and it's, you know, it is, if you have a PlayStation 4, it is absolutely a must-play game. And it's number 4 on my list.
Number 3 on my list is Uncharted 4, A Thief's End.
There we go.
Everything you just said,
yeah.
Ditto. I will say, I have been having an internal debate since May. Do I put Doom ahead of Uncharted 4, or do I put Uncharted 4 ahead of Doom?
We walk different paths, my friend.
I will explain my specific stupid tiebreaker later.
Okay.
Which is it's kind of a joke, but it really does come down to, I fell in love with the Uncharted games really hard when I played them last year on the Nathan Drake collection, because I did not play them during the PS3 collection generation. And we've talked about before, those are games that just feel kind of tailor-made for me in so many ways.
Absolutely. I mean, you are like the Indiana Jones guy.
Yeah, I love it. And, you know, I think that those games also, and I've talked about this a lot, kind of rewrote the boundaries of why I love those stories and almost retroactively ruined other versions of them. Like, I cannot watch Indiana Jones movies in the same way because they feel lessened on some level, because I think Uncharted came along and took that foundation and built on it so heavily. But Uncharted 4 completes this perfect clean sweep where every Uncharted game is a massive step up from the one before it. I cannot name another video game franchise that has done that. Can you? Off the top of your head, just 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all better?
Yeah, no.
It's crazy. I think it is not just that. I think it is the culmination of everything Naughty Dog has been doing for a decade in slowly building themselves up as the best and most competent studio working in the United States of America. This is the highest placing American game on my list. And
not quite for mine, but close.
Okay. But, you know, it's just everything about it is so perfect in so many ways. The platforming and the puzzle solving and especially the shooting are better than ever before. And some of those elements I thought had nowhere to go but down.
Yeah.
Because by the time of Uncharted 3, it's like, they're not going to do a better set piece than that. They're not going to have better platforming and adventuring than that. They're not going to have better casual banter than that. Oh no, I hadn't seen the casual banter around Crash Bandicoot yet. I had no way of knowing that. But I think, like, Uncharted 4 has this level of, again, like, we get swept up in the story, and it's good to do that because that is one of the most remarkable things about Uncharted 4. But just as a game, on its production values, on its music, on the level design, on how this game is like 15 hours long, constantly throwing new things at you, and it's impossible to get bored with it because there's no one thing. It has so many things going on in terms of the platforming and the puzzle solving and the shooting and the God Homie sections and the cutscenes that as soon as one thing starts to feel like a little bit, oh, maybe we've done this too long, nope, they're going to do something else. I mean, there's a whole part where you get in a car and just drive around Madagascar because Naughty Dog can show off that way.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing. It's one of the best things you'll play this year. And it's just, it is superior from every technical perspective, but then it really does come down to me to that story. And it is such a mature story, it is such a thoughtful story, and it is so beautifully developed that it lingers and it haunts and it provokes deep thoughts and fond memories so far beyond the realms of playing it, you know? I think it is an emotional powerhouse. It deconstructs the entire genre to which it belongs, while also doing that genre better, not just than any game, but than any movie or TV show that has ever attempted this kind of thing before. I think it is superior to most pieces of narrative content in any media ever aimed at a broad audience, and we have talked about that in depth. But I think if I had to pick one thing out that stands out to me in this game, it is the relationship between Nate and Elena.
Fucking yeah.
There is no romance in this medium that has ever been done with that level of maturity and clarity and how real those two feel. The best moments in this game are not adventuring. They are hanging around in a room, learning about Nate and Elena's shared life, whether you're exploring their house, or Nate's childhood by exploring the mansion, or at the end through what happens in the future scene, and things like that. And, you know, the moment that will always come back to me is sitting down to dinner on the couch with Elena after you've explored their house together. You play Crash Bandicoot just for fun, like a real couple would. It's unbelievable. It's something games have never done, even though Uncharted has been around for 10 years now. No one else has caught up to this. You know, and I feel like Naughty Dog even lapped themselves in some ways with this, where we could have this discussion a lot. Gun to my head, I find this even more impressive than The Last of Us in some ways, in part because The Last of Us sets itself up to have that kind of depth and maturity.
Yeah.
Uncharted doesn't necessarily ever have to go to this place. And they did go to this place this time. They never lost that sense of like fun and adventure, but they did go to a dark and mature place in this game that was frankly a very surprising gut punch, I think, to me and a lot of people, and certainly to you, I know.
Yeah.
And, you know, just there is intimacy between the characters in this game, and as you say, being able to end on a note that is not bombastic, but is gentle, and is so perfect in its gentleness. They went ahead and just threw Nathan Drake up into the Hall of Fame, and he's going to be there forever. And that is cemented by this game to me. And I love that it is a thief's end.
Yeah.
Maybe Sony will milk this cash cow again, but they pretty definitively made it so they can't milk that cash cow with Nathan Drake.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what matters at this point. So, Uncharted 4, goddamn, I love this game. And when I thought about it with Doom, the specific tiebreaker I came back to, and I want to talk about it, is I like the multiplayer in Uncharted 4 more.
Okay, sure.
Kind of joking, but kind of not, because that's the only, like with Doom, it's the campaign all the way. Uncharted 4, obviously, the campaign is plenty enough to get it to this place. I also do want to just give a special note. I think the multiplayer in Uncharted 4 is kind of fantastic, and it's the thing this year I wish I had the most, I most wish I had more time to play, because whenever I play it, I have so much fun with it. I think it's so unique and different and interesting from any other, third-person combat I've played. Like, when I started playing Gears of War 4 multiplayer, and, in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking, I just wish I was playing Uncharted. They're different games, but just, Uncharted totally lapped this thing for me by having a game where it's just kind of fun and silly, but the shooting in Uncharted 4 campaign is so good that carries over to the multiplayer. You can do your grappling, you can go get your treasure and get these things. It's just a very rewarding progression system.
Yeah.
And so, just if you're rounding out the overall package, that's a great part of Uncharted 4 that doesn't need to be there, but I'm glad it is.
Yeah, it's kind of like I had the similar feelings with The Last of Us multiplayer, because I just haven't played much of the Uncharted 4 stuff. But it is like Naughty Dog. It's the most surprising thing in some ways about the games they make is that you don't expect them to have good multiplayer at all, and then every time you check out the multiplayer, you're this is actually pretty good. This is 100 times better than it needs to be. This mode does not even need to exist, and it actually has a lot of care, and it is not just Gears of War multiplayer. It's not just a normal third-person cover shooter kind of multiplayer. It's very unique and different. And the Uncharted 4 one is very different than the Last of Us one. And both of them are odd compared to their normal peers.
Yeah. If I had unlimited money, I would buy a PS4 for my brother and buy him Uncharted 4 and say, we are playing this together online now because it's really good. So anyway, that's my number 3 game of the year, Uncharted 4.
All right.
Love it.
My number 3 game of the year is my beautiful baby. It's Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. This fucking game came out of nowhere. I mean, I have a whole hour-long story on a podcast from fucking February or whatever of how I went through this dark spiraling video game depression of games just breaking on me like Tomb Raider, and me arriving at the golden oasis that was Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth out of nowhere. No intention to play this game ever. Had heard about it earlier that day by reading about it on a fucking website, and just something was in the water, and I was like, it's only $40, and I bought Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, and then like a week later or something, I came onto this podcast and I raved like a madman about how insane the systems in this game are.
It is still one of my favorite things we've ever done on this show that like justifies all 5 years of this, is you sounding like a lunatic explaining Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth.
And then you getting the game like a month later or something and coming back and being like, I totally know what you're saying, I'm with you on this. And then it is like... This game should not be anywhere near as good as it is, but it's fucking amazing. And it's something that, like, I have, for such a long time, been so frustrated with the Pokemon franchise of just, like, them just being so resistant to changing and, like, them stuck in fucking, like, no, it has to be 4 moves. Why does it have to be 4 moves? Because the Game Boy screen was really small. Well, you're not on the Game Boy anymore, motherfuckers. You don't only need to have 4 moves. Like, why can I only have 6 Pokemon? How come the Pokemon can't level up together? Like all the things, the weird constraints that Pokemon just puts on themselves. And it looks, and, like, Pokemon is slowly working out of it. Like, this year, they're, like, decided finally, hey, HMs is a stupid fucking design decision that there's no reason for it to exist the way it exists. Let's not do that. And, like, changing up with gyms and stuff. But for me, like, it's too little too late with Pokemon, because Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth just came and was like, what are you even talking about? Like, you call that evolution, motherfucker? Like, break out a goddamn flowchart, because guess what you can do in this motherfucking video game? It has like 150-something Digimon, and you know what? You can take any one Digimon in this game, and you can literally, with enough effort, turn it into any other Digimon in the game. It is hard. You have to, like, really pay attention to what you're doing, but it is possible. You can go up, you can go down, you can go right, left, diagonal, all along this ridiculous, this fucking evolution chart, and you can take your War Greymon, and you can end up at fucking Metal Garurumon or Pabumon or fucking wherever. You can end up with some fucking Digimon that all it can do is shoot bubbles. You can do whatever you want, and it's so freeing and liberating and amazing to just arrive at that point and realize with the gameplay systems of, like, I can do whatever I fucking want with this, and I can have all these Digimon, I can have so many Digimon, and they're leveling up all at the same time back in my farm, and the way that the gameplay systems force you to switch out Digimon constantly and change up your party, change up your strategies, your moves, and really make you have to think about how you're using your Digimon in this game. It takes those sort of gameplay systems, like, not just to the next level, to, like, the next 10 levels, and just blows the lid off of this entire sort of subgenre in a way that I wasn't even really knew that I was asking for. Like, I didn't know really that this is the kind of thing I wanted. But just stuff of having, like, 3 Digimon usable in battle, having, like, the 2 sort of parallel attribute, like, rock, paper, scissors systems, stuff like that, and the complex evolution system that forces you to sort of build up your Digimon and then evolve them in creative ways to sort of get what you want, to have certain kind of moves on certain kinds of Digimon that normally wouldn't be there, and how sort of the kind of variety and the way that this system sort of bend to what you want and the creativity you can take to it. Just the gameplay systems are so complex and so rewarding to engage with in a subgenre that typically has these things at, like, the most basic surface level because they're made for kids. And Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth is a game that a kid can certainly play, but it is also a game that, like, someone who's an adult can come to and find the, like, insane depth in these gameplay systems and surface it in a way that is understandable, not like Pokemon, which has, like, this weird fucking, like, dark underbelly of people who take Pokemon super seriously and, like, pay attention to, like, they use, like, fucking stat reduction moves and shit like that like, the main game never asks you or wants you to really use. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth actually sort of incentivizes you to make use of the mechanics there and make use of the depth there. And so all the gameplay side of it is awesome. Obviously, the Digimon side of it is awesome. I've been a Digimon fan for basically my whole life. Like, I liked Digimon before I liked Pokemon because I saw the cartoon, and the cartoon blows the water out of the Pokemon cartoon. The Pokemon cartoon is stupid kitty bullshit. The Digimon cartoon deals with real adult themes, goddammit. It is about, like the Digimon cartoon dealt with kids, like the main characters on this show, their parents were divorced and, like, they were separated from their other siblings. Like, they had to deal with being adopted, you know? They had to deal with being, like, the oldest kid in the group and having all the responsibility shoved on them. Like, real actual problems that the kids had. And in a lot of ways, that kind of maturity that is more at the heart, that I find more at the heart of the Digimon franchise, does bleed into this game, both in the gameplay systems and then in the story, in Digimon Story. It's a very appropriate title in a couple of ways, because you are a cyber sleuth and you sleuth the fuck out of some cyber. But it is it has a brilliant story with amazing characters. And my favorite character of this year, if like I'm just giving this award on the spot, favorite character of the year award goes to Nokia from Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, and her character arc of being this sort of like at the face of it and at the beginning of the game, this very cliche high school, like Japanese high school girl, and then you realizing over the course of the game that as she evolves and matures, she doesn't grow out of the stereotype. She finds the room in the stereotype where the kind of like personality traits and attributes that you sort of stereotypically associate in a negative way with high school girls get turned into something very positive in a way that is really kind of amazing to me. And it's one of those ways that you can, that in a lot of sort of feminist criticism and feminist like critical discussion, there's a lot of talk about how you sort of develop female characters and make them the quote-unquote strong female character without making them just sort of like stereotypically masculine, which is something that so often happens. And I think the Nokia character in this is such a fascinating way of going about that, of them saying like, you know, like, yes, like at the beginning she's sort of like ditzy, but then when you later, it's like you see that ditziness is not, she's not fucking stupid. It's that she has this bravery of like being able to sort of take things head on and sort of decide like we're not just going to sit here and think about this and hesitate about all these problems. We have to do something. And there's this like gung-ho-ness about her and this activeness about her in the story, that she finds this power in that personality type she has, and it's not this really negative thing that hangs on her neck. And it's one of my favorite things about the game is her relationship with Omnimon, who's also, you know, he's one of my favorite Digimon from the like original movie or whatever, and how he reacts to her as like she is basically his queen, because she is, in her weird teenage high school girlness, she is like the epitome of his chivalric values of like bravery and courage and standing up for what is right and for the weak, and not like getting bogged down on small details, but just like going out there and fucking doing what you believe in. And that kind of writing and that kind of like large character arc stuff is so amazing. And the moment halfway through this story where Agumon and Gabumon digivolve together and become Omnimon, and she's just, the cutscene where that happens and she's just standing there with her arms folded and this giant Omnimon rises up behind her in the same pose, like that image is going to stick with me forever, because it is so powerful and so amazing. And then just on top of that, all the stuff that happens in the story after that point, and where they develop the characters and the sort of the darker places that the story goes, and like your relationship with Kyoko, the hot sexy detective that runs your cyber sleuth agency, and all that stuff. And the story is so well told and has all these great characters, and it has these great thematic core arguments to be made, and explores all these interesting new territories. And then it tells all these fantastic side stories on top of it, like, you know, the fucking Tentamon with the Kansai accent that goes in and changes the Wikipedia article for Kansai to be entirely in the Kansai accent, which is still one of my favorite side quests I think I've ever seen in any video game. This game just kind of has it all, from the mechanics to the story, to being funny, to being sad, to being inspiring and empowering, and then also like for like just compelling you to spend like 2 hours standing in a hallway, like just summoning random battles over and over again to get every single Digimon in the game at level 99, and doing all the extra challenges and getting every single Digimon, which is what I did with this game. And I usually don't do that kind of grinding shit in any game that is not Persona, you know? And for Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth to do that is an insane accomplishment, and I love this game to death, and fucking A. Fucking A.
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
My number 2 game of the year is Final Fantasy 15.
All right.
And I'm going to admit I went back and forth up to about 30 seconds ago how I'm going to finish this list.
All right.
But number 2, Final Fantasy 15. This is a game I have complex thoughts about, because it's a complexly qualitative game.
Some would say it's peculiarly excellent.
Peculiarly excellent, I think, is a great way to say it. I love Final Fantasy 15. And I think it is something I feel very strongly, that you can love a work of art, and you can love a person, and you can love things, even if they are flawed. And absolutely. Yes, Final Fantasy 15 is flawed and unfinished and all those things. And I think it is easy to focus in and get bogged down in all the things that are not there in Final Fantasy 15. But to me, the things that are there are some of the most powerful memories and experiences I have ever had in a video game or any other experience. And I have pages of notes on Final Fantasy 15. I'm showing you in my note. I have pages.
I can verify this.
Because I kept writing about it. And I had to figure out, what do I actually say about Final Fantasy 15? And it comes down to the pangs of memories I get a week after playing that feel like they were a lifetime ago. And it's driving in the car through this gorgeous open world, listening to tunes with my bros and relaxing. It's a travel mechanic unlike and to me superior to any other, and it is so magical. And it is riding on a chocobo with the best goddamn version of the chocobo theme ever, drifting on the fucking chocobo, jumping over fences and hills, and dismounting to hear Prompto go, "Arigato, chocobo!" And it's wonderful and it's magical, and there's nothing else like it.
If you're not out of chocobo, you ain't in chocobo.
And exploring every town and meeting so many different people and inhabiting this world that is sort of like ours, but so beautiful and heightened. And all of those towns and all of those little pit stops on the side of the road, even if they're not like fully featured and that you can go talk to everyone and have a Mass Effect dialogue wheel, they feel like they have so much character, and the music and the atmosphere is so all-enveloping in those moments. Exploring every single dungeon, from the deepest cavern to literally the highest heights, because you can go to the top of the Rack of Ravito, and I love all of it. There are some dungeons that work better than others, but I had so much fun with every single one of them, including one where the game just decides, fuck it, we've been a pretty good JRPG up to this point, let's see if we can be a platformer. And it is completely representative of the rest of the game for me in that it is crazy audacious, crazy ambitious, it doesn't entirely work, but when it's on, good God, is there nothing else like it, and I love it to fucking death. Just being with Ignis and Prompto and Gladio and feeling that easy chemistry the game creates and finding so much meaning in it to me and being on a journey that feels like you are with real friends in a world that feels to me so palpable, and that it is just the way this game has those three friend characters and you travel with them and the way the story manipulates them throughout is unlike anything I've quite ever seen. And camping or stopping in a rest area or a hotel and just breaking for the night. Having that day-night cycle that is very different than most day-night cycles in games, where you have to go, lie down, and relax just to level up, and that's brilliant. And being encouraged by the game to do so feels so distinctive and welcoming, like this game just wants you to relax and exist within its boundaries. And being on that road trip, warts and all, it is something I'm drawn to so much in life itself. I love road trips, I love driving in my car, and having it realized like this in a game. There is something about the specific atmosphere of that kind of thing that this game nails that I've never even seen another game try. And I love that about it. And if all of that was it, if it was just the exploration and those basic hangout mechanics, and with that world and those graphics, this would at least be in contention for my number 2 or number 1 slot. It wouldn't go any lower. But the bottom line is I love playing it, and the other bottom line is I did love this story, and I did love these characters, and even if it feels definitely like it is a slice of something far grander, like it is a shining piece of light being filtered through like a little keyhole or something, what does shine through is really powerful to me. And there are so many moments in the actual diegetic narrative that I remember vividly. The different god battles and the way they animate that cutscene after a certain character dies. I realized I had to elide the spoiler there. Sure. The descent into sadness and existential wandering that happens in the second half of this game, and the things that happen near the climax, and then that final chapter and that last battle and making it to the final point for these characters. It just hit me, and I think it's really easy to focus on what might have been and what isn't there and what could be better, but what is there, all of it is something I felt deeply, madly, head over heels in love with. And when you feel it, you just know. There came a point, I think it was when I was in Alticia, and just exploring that city with my bros, and I just thought in the back of my mind, yeah, this is it. This is one of my favorite games ever, and once you feel that, there's kind of no going back. And it's for so many reasons. It's for the music, it's for the graphics, it's for the just technological leaps this game makes, like you're playing an unfinished version of a game from 10 years in the future at times. I could go into the battle system and the things I love about that, and I could just talk for an hour about Yoko Shimomura's score and how that's not window dressing I can just ignore. I think it has such a huge impact on this game and is such an outstanding achievement in music for a series that has the greatest lineage of video game music, and I think puts itself back on top here. But all it takes for me to feel confident in praising this game and saying it's my number 2 game of the year is to start thinking of any of those memories I just listed, and when I do, it's not even close. So that is Final Fantasy 15, and I love it.
All right. Miyuki Sawashiro is in that game, so I'm fine with it being that high on your list.
A lot of good voice acting in that fucking game.
Yes.
Yeah, as long as you play it in Japanese.
I saw a video earlier today while I was looking at something that had some of the English voice acting in that game, and boy.
Let me amend this. Number 2 is Final Fantasy 15 in Japanese.
Yeah.
In English, it doesn't place.
Yeah.
I want to be clear about that.
Man, some of the choices they make in voice acting in that game with the dub is fucking very interesting.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, no Miyuki Sawashiro with the English version. It's just like that alone just knocks it all the way off.
They should have just left her in there and not even subtitled it.
Exactly, yeah. It's like her voice is so good you don't need to replace it. You don't need subtitles. You just feel it in your bones. Number 2 for me is a game that you talked about earlier. I want to talk about now. It's Doom. Capital D, capital O, capital O, capital M. Motherfucking Doom from 2016. And like you said when you were talking about, we have talked a lot about this game on this podcast because it came out in the first half of the year, and all these top 3 games of Digimon Story, Doom, and the game I'll talk about next are just insane surprises in different ways of Doom. I still can't believe that we live in a world where Doom came out in 2016 when, the last Doom game was Doom 3, which had very sort of mixed reception by the fans, and that came out in, 2004, I think. 2004, maybe 2005. And that was a weird sort of survival horror-y kind of shooter. And so then now, years after that, id, which has been in sort of more or less dormant in terms of in-house games since Rage, which came out in 2009, comes out in 2016 with a Doom game that we know has been internally rebooted several times. And I'll just say right now, I want to just sort of pimp out a documentary series by Danny O'Dwyer, who is a former GameStop employee or GameSpot employee. One of them has to change one of their names at some point. Or
Don't worry,
one
of them's on the way to go.
Yeah, one of them's going to go away, and it's not going to be a problem anymore. You're right about that. But Danny O'Dwyer is now on Patreon, and he has done 2 documentary series from a series called No Clip. The first one is about Rocket League, which is fantastic, and he just finished a 3-part Doom documentary series that has access to fucking footage of the Doom 4 prototypes and stuff, and direct interviews with the project leads and the dude who did the music and all this stuff. Those documentaries are fantastic. It's 90 minutes total. Just can't come recommended enough. Even if you haven't played the game, the insight it has in terms of how these kinds of games get made is unbelievable. But that aside, we know that this project was rebooted internally several times, has just been in development hell, and then just kind of came the fuck out of nowhere and just kicked our ass. And it's just this unbelievable game that looks at all this conventions of first-person shooter design from the mid-2000s on, and how cemented we are in the Call of Duty, or now sort of moving on to slightly more Titanfall-ish movement thing, that kind of first-person shooter design, how just tightly cemented we are in that. And then Doom just comes out and throws all of that away and just says, no reloading, no taking cover, no sprinting, aiming down sights, fuck that shit. You are going to run as fast as hell with a double-barreled shotgun, move around, shoot things in the face. You are always moving forward from enemy to enemy. You are never backing away. You are never afraid because you are the most powerful motherfucker in that room every single time, and you just have to prove it to those asshole demons. And that's what this game is. And it's such an amazing feeling to sort of take that, what felt like what video games were in the 90s for good or worse, of just like being these kind of extreme violent power fantasies, and that's what the kind of the tradition that Doom is a part of, and in some ways kind of birthed. And going back to that stuff and like rethinking that and saying like, how does that play in 2016, and how do we do that? And they just sort of, at every single step, they made the right decision in a way that like is unbelievable. And like you said, it is a perfect game from every single level, like the technical quality of it, the graphics, and the performance on consoles. It runs at a smooth 60 frames per second all the time, and it looks fantastic. The sound design is like at the top of the industry. The music, the soundtrack in this game is unbelievable.
And the way it interacts with the sound
and
design.
The way it interacts with the sound design, and just in the level and the the way the music sort of dynamically evolves based on what you are doing and where you are. Like, it is still one of my favorite little tiny musical effects in any game is when you go into the map in Doom and the music track sort of like fades down and like the melody kind of comes out and you're just left with the bass and the percussion and you're just staring at this map and it's just like, and it's like the way that evolves based on how you're playing, you get so invested in the way that it just sort of feels like the track is scoring what you are doing, and what you are doing is generally kicking some fucking ass in this game. And it is just, everything about the combat design is incredible. All the choices they make in terms of having the sort of like push forward kind of combat, of always going forward, always fighting the next enemy, never taking cover, the ways that they incentivize that, and actually like improving upon this sort of gameplay model that the original Doom had, and saying like, that was good, but we can do better. Like, we can fix the health pack problem in a real way by having you destroy enemies to get health back, which encourages you to be more and more aggressive as you play the game, because the only way you can survive is to kill stuff. And that's what you want to do in the game. And that's like brings me to another part of the game that I think gets overlooked too much, is that the game has this really carefully tailored setting that is so necessary to making the game feel lighthearted and enjoyable, instead of a game this violent could very easily spiral into feeling kind of mean-spirited in a way that wouldn't make it as much fun to play. But the game is set in this like really funny, satirical world that like feels like it echoes Paul Verhoeven kind of movies. And that was one of the things about the No Clip documentary that made me so happy, is O'Dwyer interviewed one of the guys who's like one of the top guys at Doom, and he kept on referencing RoboCop, and like it was like, yes, I feel vindicated about like finding this weird dark 80s satire in Doom, because it's so there of like the fucking bizarre corporate demonic culture of walking into a room and just hearing this voice over the intercom just say like demonic Latin chants, and hearing just like people say, and remember to report to the White Council on Wednesdays. And you're like, what the fuck is the White Council?
It is the closest we are ever going to get to Portal 3.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's the closest we're ever going to come, because Valve doesn't make games anymore.
Yeah, it is just so funny and so smart and dark, and just finding those like strange things of just like, and remember to sign up for the weekly human sacrifice meeting. It's like, what? Okay.
Or the moment where the like robot, you come in and it's just speaking in like tongues.
Yeah.
That whole part.
It's so fucking funny, and it's that kind of tone and setting, and then the way that the Doom Marine plays the perfect straight man in that setting of just like, I mean, the whole first level of this game is an unbelievable masterclass in just sort of like teaching the player both the kind of game you are in and like the gameplay systems, in that like you wake up from a stone sarcophagus like surrounded by candles, a demon is right in your face, you fucking just like destroy the demon's skull by smashing it on your sarcophagus, get up, grab a pistol, and within like 10 seconds of the game starting, you're killing stuff. You walk outside and you see that your armor is also encased in a stone sarcophagus that is being worshipped by like holograms, and you put the armor on, and when you put the armor on, that's when fake Optimus Prime comes over the intercom and is talking about all this shit, and you see like demonic invasion in progress on the fucking like screen, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go kill some shit. You clear out the first room full of Gorness and imps, you get that, and like you get the fucking shotgun, you go into the elevator, the music starts picking up, Optimus Prime comes over the radio again, and he's talking about how, you know, I did what I had to. We are fixing mankind. I did what was necessary. And while he's giving this speech about how tapping into hell energies is the only way to sort of fix humanity's problems, the Doom Marine very casually looks down to this just destroyed, bloodied corpse at his feet, cracks his knuckles, and then the door opens up and he pumps the shotgun in time with the music. And it's like the most beautiful, perfectly orchestrated thing you will see in a video game. It's one of just like the best first levels in a video game ever. And that kind of stuff is just what all of Doom feels like, is that it's just so perfectly designed, from the levels to the combat to the music to the setting and the humor and the writing and the boss fights and just the way that things escalate and all the weapons you get and the mods on the weapons that change fundamentally how you use the weapons. All that stuff is so perfect. And the pacing and how they use the old sort of Doom-style collectible stuff to inform the pacing of the game and give you something to do in between fights, so you're not just killing stuff constantly. And so when you come up against a fight, you are excited for it. And like just the moment when you go to hell for the first time and you go up to this ancient tablet with a giant glyph on it and you press your hand on it and you see this doom, or this demon voice come like booming out of it, talking about how this guy, the Doomslayer, came to hell like 200 years ago and how he killed everything and that the demons are afraid of you. And it is that sense of just the demons are always afraid of you because you are the guy who goes in and cleans up the demons and there's nothing they can do against you. It's that kind of game design and power fantasy that's so pure and fun and engaging that you just don't find in video games. And to have it done in 2016 and have it done so smartly that it doesn't feel out of place in 2016 is an achievement that I don't think I will ever understand how they accomplished that shit, you know? It really is top to bottom. Doom is an incredible achievement in game design and world design and audio engineering and music that comes together to just make a single-player first-person shooter campaign, the likes of which we've never seen before, and unless they make a sequel to this game, I don't think we will ever see again. But even if we don't see a Doom 2 Hell on Earth again, I'm happy to just have Doom and play it again and again, because this is also the only game on this list that I played through twice. I played on the hardest difficulty.
Yeah. Doom is a fucking thing.
Yeah, it is. It is a fucking thing.
All right, so it's time for our number ones.
Time for our number ones. What is your number one game of the year, Jonathan?
My number one game of the year. If you told me 12 months ago this is where this was going.
Just say it. Just say it.
Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth!
Preach it, my brother! Yes! I am so happy this is where we are! I am so happy for what I have done to you. This is so amazing. I can't believe we are here.
And this is why it is my number one game of the year. It is also not, I think this was a poetic reason I put it at number one. It's the first new game I played in 2016.
Yeah.
In calendar year 2016, because I rolled off The Witcher 3 and I played Digimon Story.
That's a hell of a double feature.
Look, here's the thing. I could go from so many different directions. I legitimately do believe I can make the argument this is better than any other game that came out this year.
I believe that as well.
I could make that argument. It comes down to something personal, and the big thing is, a big reason I play the games I play is to talk about them on this podcast with you, for our audience, and hear things back. And look, my favorite thing we did on the podcast this year was talk about Digimon Story.
Yes.
My favorite segment this year is you telling me about Digimon Story and sounding like a lunatic. And if you want to know what that was like in the room, like if we had a video feed, it was about 10 minutes into that lunatic rant, me pulling out my phone and being like, how much does this game cost? Because you hadn't told me like if it was a DLC kind of thing or whatever. So I'm like going on Amazon, like, can I get this game? And it like, for a couple weeks in a row, I was like, should I just pull the trigger and buy this? And anyway, it came out of fucking nowhere and took over our podcast for, I think we had a fan who like counted it. We had a crazy number of weeks in a row.
It was like 2 or 3 months where we mentioned Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth at least once per podcast.
Not just mentioned, but like had a segment.
Talked about it.
Talked about it for like 2 or 3 months. It like became, in a year where we had no Doctor Who and no Persona. I mean, you had Persona, but you know what I mean.
But
like,
no Persona yet, even with me.
Yeah. So all of this stuff, it's like, we didn't have those things to talk about, and Digimon came in and swept us all up. And the big thing for me, not just the podcast side of it, is that it was a surprise.
Yeah.
And we live in a world, especially with movies, with games, with everything, where it's all hype 100% of the time. And even games that, you know, I really love, like an Uncharted 4, there's something slightly exhausting, even when it's great and exceeds expectations, about the years of trailers and hype and delays and all that stuff. And Digimon Story was not that for me, in extra part because I knew nothing about Digimon. To the point where at the beginning of 2016, 12 months ago, I still thought Digimon was like the weird Pokemon offshoot. I did not, literally guys, I didn't know what Digimon was.
Yeah, I couldn't tell an Agumon from a Gabumon from anything.
I mean, I knew Agumon by sight.
Yeah, because he's a cool little dinosaur man.
But I couldn't tell you what his name was or anything like that. You know, you have the 3-starter Digimon. I'd never seen them in my life. And I picked up this game, I'd heard Sean talk like a crazy person about it, and I got into it, and I felt like I was jumping into the asylum along with you, because Digimon Story is a wonderful celebration of creativity. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that 2016, I think, in the history books, this is the year when this generation of games started. You had a little trickle last year with Witcher 3 and Batman Arkham Knight. But I think if you think of generations not defined strictly by the year the platform launches, but by when people start to make use of that platform, that was 2007 last time. It's 2016 this time. And we had the most graphically advanced and technologically ambitious games ever made this year. And so many of them. And we talked about them some of them aren't even on our lists. It's crazy. But to me, the game that ultimately had the most lasting impact throughout the year was this little game, probably made by like 20 people in Japan.
Originally for the Vita.
Originally for the Vita, which is where I wound up buying it fucking twice because I wanted to play it on the Vita too, and so I played it back and forth. Yeah, just made for the Vita, came out here remastered for the PS4, but couldn't have had a large development staff.
Didn't even have an English dub.
Just subtitles. Has very simple graphics, has very simple environments. I don't believe you can even control the camera in, like, the Tokyo parts, right?
No, you can't,
Yeah, so stuff like that. Like, it is a PS Vita-ass PS Vita game. You have to understand that, and it's part of why it's wonderful. And it gets by on strength of story, on strength of character, on strength of gameplay design, and on strength of the most insane system for a JRPG battle system I have ever seen. You talked about it to death a couple minutes ago, so I don't even need to go into all of it. But as you say, those fucking Digivolutions can go up, and they can go down, and they can go sideways, and you confuse them, and you get all this crazy shit. And it ruined Pokemon for me for life. And I realized that about 5 minutes into Pokemon Sun and Moon, and it took me about 10 hours before I realized I can't play this. Like, Pokemon Sun and Moon, I'm not going to say they're bad games. They're good games. I can never play Pokemon again. It's just like, it's over. The honeymoon, like, whatever. Like, I was trying to explain to Thomas, like, because every time I talk to my brother about this game, he kind of rolls his eyes, and I get it from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, you were once in that seat.
Yes, I was.
I am the only one that will never understand, because I've always been part of the enlightened group that loved Digimon.
Yes, and all I can try to tell him is, like, Thomas is like, it's so great they finally have the experience share and we can level up these 6 Pokemon together. And I'm like,
6 Pokemon.
6 Pokemon.
That's cute.
And I'm like, Thomas, do you know how many you could level up in Digimon? And he's like, how? I'm like, well, you start with the 12 in your party. And you have 3 that you have out at once, which is really cool because you got these 3 Digimon, and they each have a certain elemental type and a certain data type. And so those are 2 different rock, paper, scissors programs, like, in tandem with one another, and that make it really dynamic to play. And I actually picked up the game again the other night on my Vita and was playing around with it. And it was funny how fast I got back into the mode of thinking in that way, because it's a really strategic way to play. But you got your 3 Digimon out. Then you got 6 Digimon in your pocket, and you can pull those Digimon out whenever you want. You can just swap them, say, I don't have the right data and like elemental type out here, I'll put this one in. And eventually there's a point where the level design and everything is so good, you're going to need your 12 Digimon. You can't get by with like 3 Digimon. Let alone your 1 starter Digimon, which I don't even know what it became.
That's one of the hallmarks of how great Digimon stories actually is like 12 hours in, your starter Digimon has transmogrified to the point that you don't even remember. I want to say I eventually narrowed it down to, like, I had 2 Zudomons at the end. I was like, it's one of these 2. I don't know which, because I ended up with 2 in the process of trying to make another one. I don't remember which one you ended up as, Terriermon, but you're one of these 2 guys.
Yeah, I did Terriermon. I think he's in my final party, but I don't know. It's kind of sad. But anyway, so you got your 12 in your pocket, or 6 in your pocket, or however many in your... So you have 9 in your pocket, 3 out on the field, 12 with you all the time. But you're not just leveling up 12. You're leveling up 12 back home in your Digifarm, and they level up alongside, and you can go feed them and play with them and all that stuff. But wait, you don't get just 1 Digifarm. You get 4.
I think you get 5, don't you?
I thought you got 4.
Maybe 4.
I think 4 is the limit.
Okay.
Because overall, like, 4 times 12 plus the 12 is 60
plus
Digimon.
the 12 in your party, yes.
So you are leveling up 60 Digimon at once, and you are actively managing that the entire time you are playing this game. And right there, if you don't understand why this is Game of the Year, I don't know if I can help you.
Yeah.
Because that is an amazing thing. I mean, if you like Pokemon, and you like raising your 6 Pokemon, oh man, 60 at once, it's a different kind of rush. You can't go back. It's like if you're like, you're into heroin, but then you get black tar heroin.
Yeah, I don't think that fucking, you don't even get high. You don't even feel it. It's like drinking a cup of coffee.
It is totally like that. So, not that I've done these things, but that's what I imagine it to be. Digimon is the closest I'm going to get to hard drugs.
We've all been there.
Yeah. But as you say, On top of all of that, the gameplay systems are so good, and I love the overall style of the game and everything. It's got one of the best JRPG battle systems, to the point where it even kind of puts my favorite games of all time to shame, where Persona 3 and 4 don't have a battle system that involving.
Yeah.
You know? But on top of that, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth has a really good story and really good characters. Is it my favorite story of the year? Probably not. Is it my favorite characters of the year? Probably not. But is the overall package the thing that maybe charmed me the most? Undoubtedly. And it has stuck with me since fucking February when I played this game. And I just has, as I said, you talked about Nokia, and I love that character, but there's so many others you could go into because this game has this kind of innocuous cast at the beginning where you think they feel like kind of almost like your generic Pokemon side characters. Yeah. And then it starts complicating them and adding depth to them, where you have basically the guy who would be your rival in another Pokemon game. What's his name?
Arata.
Arata?
Yeah.
And he goes on a fucking arc in this game.
Yeah, he does. He goes to places.
He goes to some places, and it is dynamic. And this game goes to some places where there's some like end-of-world shit that really made me think in a positive association to like Persona 3. And that's a strong fucking association if you know me and Sean here.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. But also just the casual charm of being at Kyoko's detective agency and going and taking a case off the wall and having like what you talked about with the guy who the virus that makes it all a Kansai accent.
Yeah, or like the boxing website that has been taken over by dogs with boxing gloves.
Every one of those side quests is just a home run in terms of just charm and clever writing, and it's just, this game is overflowing with it for 70 fucking hours. It's definitely the second most I played a game this year after Fire Emblem, which again, I don't know if that counts because it's 2 games.
Yeah.
But yeah. So all of that is so wonderful, and while the environments of like Tokyo and some of the digital worlds you go to are very simple on a graphical level, boy, do they have charm to them. And while these characters are simple on a graphical level, boy, do they have charm to them. And there is so much to this game that just feels so all-enveloping. And throughout this year, because it was kind of the first game I played, I kept holding up other games to Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. And in my heart of hearts, deep down, in a place I don't know if I even knew existed, it kept coming back to Digimon Story. Because it came out of nowhere. It was the ultimate surprise in a time when we don't get good surprises anymore. It is happy and optimistic in a way that is not empty or shallow. It is smart from a gameplay level and a storytelling level. And every game I would hold up to it, I'd say, sure, this has better graphics. And maybe this has bigger acting. And this has the fancy motion capture. And this has fucking chocobo drifting. But at the end of the day, none of them are quite Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. And what I think it comes down to is being able to just talk about it here on the podcast with you. That brought me more joy than any other gaming experience of 2016. And I can't think of a better reason to put something at number 1. It's part of the reason I put Doctor Who at number 1 on my TV list last year.
Yeah.
This is just part of the way I filter these experiences. And I will say I went really hard back and forth on my number 2 and 1 this year. Up to and including my notes are not current for what I ultimately decided because I printed them about 12 hours ago. And, you know, my number 2 and 1, Final Fantasy 15 and Digimon, were always my number 2 and 1. As soon as I had played both of them, there was nothing else that was going to take over those two. And I think what it was is I had to like hold back the recency bias of Final Fantasy 15 and realize Final Fantasy 15 has consumed my waking thoughts for 3 weeks. Digimon Story has kind of done it all year.
Yeah, like I haven't played that game since February or like I guess early March, and like I did not go back to it. I did not need to reference anything to remember Nokia's name and Kyoko's name and Arata's name. And it's like I cannot do that for a lot of fucking video games that I played like almost 12 months ago.
And even if this is not technically my soundtrack of the year, the soundtrack needs special mention. It is so fantastic. It adds such a charm to this game. And again, this is a game where I don't know if there's any individual component of this game that I would say it does better than something else this year, but the overall package, maybe because of the surprise element, maybe because you and I got to talk about it and have fun with it. I don't know.
Maybe because it's just that damn good.
Maybe it's because it's just that damn good. It's the weird chemistry that exists between a piece of art and the observer. And this year, the best year for gaming I have ever covered, that piece of art was Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. And I am so befuddled and so happy inside that I get to say that.
What a beautiful, strange adventure we have been on, my friend. that we are here today.
I mean, I have the next one they're bringing over pre-ordered on Amazon.
Yeah.
It's a totally different kind of Digimon game, but I don't care. I've got the bug.
It's got Agumon in it. That's all I need.
Yep. I mean, I still have to have the conversation with you of what Digimon should I watch, because I haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah.
But I clearly have to. But I also love that Digimon Story is still just kind of its own thing, and that's my Digimon experience.
Yeah.
Because I can't stress enough, it stands on its own.
Yeah, there's almost something... I'm almost weirdly jealous of you being able to see it from that lens, because it was the kind of thing, I think, as you asked me, like when I was first talking about it, like, is it a game that someone who's never played Digimon before could play? And it's like my knee-jerk reaction of what I would have almost said was like, no, you can't. Like, because I had, like, I have not seen every Digimon thing, but I know more than enough about Digimon that I know, like, I was familiar with at least half the Digimon that were in the lineup, because they're very heavy on, like, the early Digimon. But then, like, I almost said no, and then I thought about it for a second. I was like, well, wait a fucking second. Like, I didn't know anything about Pokemon the first time I played Pokemon Red. Like, I hadn't seen the cartoon. I didn't know what a Pikachu was. I just played that game, and you just accept it. And I realized, like, just because I have this perspective and this franchise has existed before does not mean that someone's going to fucking play Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth and, like, go like, oh, what's this little dinosaur dude? I can't play. This is just ridiculous. I can't accept a little dinosaur, man. And it was just like, there's something kind of magical about that idea of going to this game and having that be the first time you encounter all these, like, crazy character designs, because Digimon has some fucking crazy Digimon in it. And it, like, their design philosophy is very different than Pokemon, and I really love how Digimon look and, like, the weird shit that Digimon can be, because they are not just, like... They're never just like a bird. They're never just like a bug or a little dinosaur. Like, it's always something kind of crazy looking. They throw an insane twist into it. And the idea of you being able to approach all these things completely fresh is pretty amazing to me.
And I will say, just to end it, the other thing to me is also the audience interaction component of this podcast. And my favorite comment I have ever gotten on this podcast is a tweet of a guy. I forget which listener it was, and I'm sorry. It's been like a year now.
Yeah.
But he said, you guys finally wore me down. I bought Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. It's the greatest thing ever. And I feel like that justifies every minute we have spent recording this goddamn podcast.
Yeah. It is in many ways the game I feel like I have evangelized harder than anything else, because it just fucking deserved it.
Play Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. It's also on that PlayStation sale, which is great.
Yeah, it's been on sale a couple of times, and just spread the Digimon love.
So I'm just going to say it one more time so I can try to accept this reality. My number one game of the year is Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth.
Oh, it feels so good.
It feels great. What's your number one game of the year?
My number one game of the year is another big surprise for me, an insane surprise, and something that when I came down to it, I was so sure for the longest time that Doom was going to be my number one game of the year. I thought it when I finished it for the first time. I was like, this is the hurdle other games need to cross. Because as much as I love Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the original Doom. So it had a huge impact on me how amazing Doom was, and that I could say that Doom 2016 is one of, if not the best game that came out in this year. It's like just nuts. But there was this other little game that I kept on coming back to over and over again. I played its beta when it came out in the beta, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I'm not so sure about it. But they're doing this sort of episodic thing, so I guess I'll just check it out. And then I checked it out, and I just kept on playing it, and more stuff came out, and more stuff came out, and I played it, and I played it, and I played it. And when I came down to this list, and I was looking at it, and went by the gut check rule, the way I determined that Hitman is my number one game of this year is that all I wanted to do while making the list was to just go and play the elusive target on Hitman. Because it's just this game that, to me, kind of going back to the beginning of my list with Gundam Breaker 3, it is not a game I play to beat, because you can't beat Hitman. And that's the magic of the episodic structure of that game, is that it just says it's okay to just play with this game. You don't have to play the game, you play with it. It's you go into these levels, into this playground with these toys, and you walk around and you listen to the funny dialogue, and you hatch ridiculous schemes on how to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. And it's this game that is so open to whatever you want to bring with it. And it's this game that the more I came to it and the more I came to understand it, the more the game opened up and opened up and opened up like this beautiful murder flower. It's just which culminated in one of the darkest and kind of most amazing experiments I've ever had with a video game, which I talked about on this podcast around Halloween. Was I decided, like, there's all these different ways that you can approach this game, and like I had recently done my first Silent Assassin run, and I'm going to talk about that because that is like my Silent Assassin thing I did with that one elusive, the chef elusive target. I want to go into detail on how I accomplished that because that's a big reason why this game is this high. But the other thing was like I decided, what if instead of just trying to be completely stealthy, what if you just went in and killed every single person on the map? And I loaded up that Colorado map with a dark task in mind and an assault rifle in hand, and I spent like an hour killing every single person on the map and turning it into a complete graveyard, and just seeing the ways that the incredibly complex mechanics of that game world accommodated this insane way of playing in a way that just like is kind of magical. That is, again, like an antithesis to, I think, a lot of more kind of modern game design philosophy tends to be this a lot more sort of pared down, restricted, linear kind of straightforward thing. That even if you have open world games, the kind of open world games we have, even if something I love like Witcher 3 is it's an amazing setting and story and narrative and with great gameplay mechanics, but it is restricted and constricted. Like, you know, every time it's not a problem for Witcher 3, but it's just like sort of a part of what the game is, and I feel like Hitman is a game that sort of runs counter to this design philosophy, is that every time you ride into a town in Witcher 3, all the people in that town are in the same place every single time. They say the same kind of lines, and it's not an issue because you're not spending a lot of time in those towns, but you can't go into that town and do whatever you want. It's kind of one of the things that is remarkable about the Bethesda games, as glitchy as they are, is that they tend to allow you to kind of do whatever you want, but they're not always designed in such a way that it's fun to do whatever you want. Like, you can go into a town in Bethesda, in like Skyrim, and just steal everything and murder all the people there, but
it would be really hard and not very fun.
It's really hard, and it's not fun, it's not encouraging, and it doesn't feel like the gameplay does not encourage you to do it in any way at all, and it just feels like you're sort of like breaking the rules or something. It's weird. Whereas Hitman, it's just like, nah, like, do whatever you want. We make these intricate, insane clockwork levels, and you go in and we have like all these different AI systems, and you just go in and you do what you want with it. And we have all our like sort of bespoke ways of, you know, get the guy to go run into the fucking like underground lab and get into his biplane and fly off, and if you time it right, you shoot him with a fucking cannonball, and we'll give you some challenge points for doing that because it's crazy and awesome. It's just like they have their ways that they designed for you to do it, or like also on the Sapienza map, you have like the explosive golf ball and stuff. They have all their in brilliant creative ways that you can kill them in a very sort of like designed way that the designers sort of like clearly put in there on purpose. But then one of the things that made the game sort of shine to me is the elusive targets and the escalation missions, and have the way that this game just sort of, like I said, it opens up in a way that you see that, oh, I don't need all those things. I don't need the sort of designed opportunity to take out targets. I can just hatch whatever plan I want to hatch. And so I want to talk about sort of in detail. This was like about a month ago. My plan for the first Silent Assassin challenge I did with an elusive target was that chef one. And it was something where I just didn't really... I had never really considered doing the Silent Assassin thing, and for whatever reason, just on a whim, I was just, I might as well try it. And how you do the Silent Assassin challenge is you have to take out the target without anyone noticing you, without there being any recorded camera footage, and without any bodies being spotted. So basically... And you cannot kill anyone but the target. So it forces you to, if you're going to get a disguise, you have to knock someone out where no one can see you, take the disguise, and put them in like a body box or something where no one's going to find them. And then if you're going to kill the target, you have to kill the target where no one is around, no one notices, and where you are close enough to something where you can hide the body. Or if like you are in a bathroom stall or something, you could kill them there. So it is a really demanding, challenging thing to do, especially with the elusive targets that have pretty strict sort of routes that they have a lot of guards with them. And so when I went in to do the Silent Assassin thing with the elusive target, I sort of decided, because the way the elusive target works is that is this time-limited event that once you complete an objective, like you kill the elusive target, you have to finish the mission, or you cannot restart, and if you get killed, you are dead. But before you accomplish that objective, you can restart the mission as much as you want and keep on going in. So the way I did it with the Silent Assassin thing, I think the way you kind of need to do it, is I went in a couple of times just on pure reconnaissance runs and followed the target around the Paris map, and just sort of, I just followed him like from far enough distance that nobody was taking notice of me, and just sort of like, where does he go? What does he do? What can I do with all the tools I have? Because this was after I had complete mastery on all the maps, so I had every unlockable item you could have, and just like, what, with all of these tools at my disposal and this character, what can I do to kill him with no one noticing and dispose of the body somewhere? And it's this really intricate puzzle, and slowly I sort of just formulated this plan of he goes to the kitchen in the basement, and there is and I know how to do this. There's one guard that walks this one hallway, there are two chefs in the kitchen, and there's one chef in another parallel hallway that has a bit of a sight line. And I slowly built up this plan of moving all these pieces of, okay, I'd use a coin, or no, couldn't use a coin yet, but I think what I did is I put I grabbed a wrench, threw a wrench that distracted a guard, that when he walked over, he would see a pistol that I put on the ground, my pistol. He would come over, I would knock out the guard, get the guard costume. Great, have the guard costume. Then I would go over to the stairway that the chef comes down, and I would throw another object to attract a guard that is by the door, knock that guard, put him in this cupboard right by the door, and I cleared this stairway, this bottom stairwell that leads into the kitchen, because my plan was, the chef has an entourage of 3 people, one of whom is armed, and they are with him all the time. So the only way to take care of the chef is to separate from them by either picking them all off or getting the chef enough of a distance from them. And my plan was, the chef goes into this kitchen through that one door at the bottom of that stairwell, where there is only that one guard standing in the stairwell that I can take care of easily, and he exits through that same door. And so my plan was, he comes, where I can separate him is when he comes back out through the door, he's in the front of the train. If you close the door, you can knock him out and put him in the cupboard. And I devised this plan after a lot of experimentation. At first, I tried to get him with an emetic poison vial to get him to go throw up somewhere, but he didn't throw up in a bathroom because there was a trash bag closer that he went to, so that plan didn't work. And there's all this planning that sort of came together to sort of narrow it down to, all I need to do is get enough time for him to be on this side of the door, and the train of people to be on that side of the door, that I can knock him out and put him in this fucking cupboard, because there's nobody right here. In the process I had to go through of crafting this plan and figuring out, okay, how do I get this chef out of this room? I need to take care of this one security guard, so I lure that security guard over there. Then when this chef has his back turned, I can knock this chef out and then drag him over here, then knock that chef out. And so I slowly just completely cleared out that area, so that then eventually when the chef was there, the main chef that I needed to kill is in there with his group of people. I ducked down, and I had a remote audio distraction device, and I put the audio distraction device on a little bit of a wall that they couldn't see. And the reason why I needed to clear out the one guard that was in that room is because his routine took him in vision of this audio distraction device, and he would go to remove it. So when he did that the first time, I had to take care of that guard so that I could put that device and have it there. So this whole plan was constant trial and error of I need to put all these pieces in place, and every time I get to the next step of the plan, I notice something else that interferes with it, so then I have to rework the plan to accommodate for okay, I have to take this guard out. And so I was doing all of that, and then I got sort of all that sort of to work. Then my plan was to use, when he goes through the door, I trigger the remote audio distraction device to get all of his people to stay there, him to turn around. I close the door, knock him out, throw him in the cupboard, and just walk away. But I couldn't get the timing to work quite right because they were just too close to him, that even when I would trigger the remote audio distraction, there wouldn't be enough time for me to be able to close the door, because they would be just kind of standing right there and I couldn't close it. So then I figured out, okay, if I clear out that whole area with where this one chef is, and then I put a gun on the ground that will distract the guards, or I will distract one of their attention and throw a wrench, it will get his entourage to see it. They will tell the guard that's with them. The guard will go to walk over to get the gun, and then the time it gets him to get the gun, pick up the gun, and then go take the gun to a case to put it somewhere, that gives me enough time to have that entourage separated enough that when I trigger the audio distraction device, all their attention goes to that. I close the door, knock the dude out. They're far enough away that I have enough time to knock him out and drag him over and put him in the cupboard, and then just walk away, and nobody notices anything fucking happen. And there's 5 different chefs in different fucking boxes all over the place, and one guard in one box, and I just walk out, get the Silent Assassin achievement, and it took me 90 minutes to put all that together and keep on formulating this different plan each time of having to accommodate with all these different pieces. And that is just like one really specific way of an infinite number of ways you could have taken care of that target and satisfied all those conditions. Because there's all these different areas on this stop, and like there was a number of times where I almost scrapped my whole plan. It was like, maybe it would be easier if I went here and did this, but I was like, no, I will find out other shit in this room that is not going to be as easy as I think it is. And it's that kind of stuff with Hitman that it just rewards this very thorough, creative kind of gameplay that most video games don't engage with at all. And it's this incredible experience that when I started playing the game, I just kind of liked it. And then I played it more and I liked it more. And then like more new maps came out and I played those and I liked it more. And I liked it more. And I played the elusive targets and I liked it more. And just the more I learn about the game, the more I like the game and more I want to engage with it. And it speaks to something else brilliant about the game, that the only thing that made all of this possible is the developers being bold enough to take a chance on what has been, with the exception of the Telltale games, a dead business model in video games for like 10 years. You know, like the episodic model was something that a lot of video game developers were very excited about in the mid-2000s, like Valve with their Half-Life 2 episodes and all that kind of shit. And all that shit crashed and burned. I am still waiting for Half-Life 2 Episode 3. Next year, it will be 10 years since Half-Life 2 Episode 2 came out. And so, like, that episodic model that is a more of a gameplay-first kind of thing as opposed to the story-first Telltale thing just completely crashed and burned. And then, so, like, nearly 10 years after Half-Life 2 Episode 2, this developer comes around with this, like, old franchise Hitman that, like, they took a big hit of cred on their Hitman Absolution game because a lot of fans did not like that because it was too big of a departure from Hitman. And they decided, we're going to make a traditional Hitman game in the gameplay, but we're going to take a chance on this new kind of business model that opens up this whole game to all these kinds of possibilities, that makes the elusive targets possible, that makes a player like me who would normally just play through each map sequentially and then put the game down and decide I'm done with it the way I did with Dishonored 2, and like going back and trying to play Dishonored 2 again, I just don't feel it. Hitman is like, I feel it. I want to go back in. I want to go in from all these different locations and start with the different costumes and go in with different kinds of items and go in with different objectives on different targets with different like means and get the sniper assassin challenge and get the silent assassin challenge and get the suit only challenge and all this stuff. And for a developer to find a way to both design this brilliant game that has so many ways you can approach it, that just gets better the deeper you get into it, and then also find a business model and a structure and a package that incentivizes the player to engage with the game in that way if they are willing to, is something that is amazing to me in both a sort of like, it is a creative achievement and it is a business achievement that is so fascinating when those things work in concert with each other.
They're very intertwined.
And, yeah, they're intertwined, and those two things so very rarely work together. If anything, they usually destroy each other. The business interests and the creative interests clash. Here, they make each other better, and it's something where, like, I hope that Hitman serves as a model for other kinds of games in the future. Like, I would love it if Dishonored 3 took a look at Hitman and decided, let's do that kind of thing. Let's stop trying to do our linear narrative fucking bullshit, and let's just make these big crazy levels and fill it with all this different kind of stuff to do that makes it fun and engaging and more rewarding to go back to it more and more times. So you get the sense of, like in Hitman, of when you play the fucking Paris level for the 6th time and all of a sudden you find this pipe that goes from the ground floor up to the top floor and you had never seen it before and you're like, oh my God.
There's a pipe on Paris that goes from the bottom to the top?
There is. There's actually a couple.
I gotta find that.
Yeah. It changes some of the way that you can move around that map. And like all those maps have a billion one of those of just like, oh, I had no idea that there was a direct way to go from this spot of this map to that spot of that map. And I literally spent an hour the last time I was on this map to try to get here. And if I had just been a little more persistent and just a little bit more clever, I could have seen this other way, done this other thing. And Hitman is just like, it's a game I'm going to keep on playing. It's a game I'm going to play literally right after this because I haven't finished doing the new exclusive target yet. I'm going for a Silent Assassin on that one as well. And I still am formulating a plan because I'm finding a little more difficulty with that one. And it's one of my most anticipated games of next year is Hitman Season 2 and seeing where they go, because I think their ability to sort of build on their gameplay and like map design sensibilities with each subsequent map release and sort of play with what these kinds of maps can be, with like the Colorado map being dense and having 4 targets, and the Hokkaido map being sort of a little more broader and having 2 really distinct sections that you basically have to rely on disguises completely to get you around the map because you can't get keys. Like, that kind of game design creativity is something that I feel like you don't see a lot of games have like now or really ever before, and it's something that it's kind of weird to me that normally I feel like I approach games in not necessarily narrative first, but like I usually prioritize narrative stuff in games really heavily. It's one of the reasons why I love Persona as much as I do. It's one of the reasons I love Witcher 3 as much as I do. But like for whatever reason this year, two of my favorite games of the year, my two favorite games of the year, Doom and Hitman, are both games that I feel like make such huge strides in how video games can play and what they can be in it as a play space instead of being a direct narrative sort of funnel. That's like there's nothing wrong with narrative games and there's nothing wrong with like gameplay first games, but there's something about these two games that for me just impacted me really hard this year, and it's that kind of like being able to play in this game and be creative and be unique and have a very unique personal experience every time you play this game that you know other people playing this game are not going to have. That was really powerful to me this year as like an experience. And so Hitman, it was the game that kept on giving. You know, like every time you give it a little bit, it just pulls you more and more in. So Hitman is my number one game of the year.
It's a great game.
It's a great
It did not make my top 10, but I really like. It's a game I respect more than I enjoy, I will admit. But I respect the hell out of it. And I respect that model a lot because I think there are so many genres that would benefit from this.
Yeah.
Like, frankly, I would love to see Nintendo do like a Mario-style thing with that.
Yeah.
Of like, you know, like you could, and not that Mario games have ever suffered from being all at once, but imagine if they could do something where like you started with like a world or two, and then they really dived in on each of those and maybe made those like coin challenge kind of things they do even more in depth or something.
Like almost like Super Mario 64 with like the different star objectives. And, like,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, you could. That feels like if you were to make Super Mario 64 today, you would do it Hitman style, right? And you would just fill the castle as you went along. I think there's so many possibilities, and I agree. I hope the industry notices. So, you know, Hitman I enjoyed most for the Colorado and Marrakesh maps are the ones where I got really into it, and the other ones didn't pull me in as much. But I can totally see how you get so into it, and I love that. And I think it's funny because you explain your whole elusive target thing, and it sounds like this game is like a brainwashing program to teach you how to be an assassin.
It is like it, but it is something that's kind of funny that like. It's almost kind of like what I was saying with Overwatch of like when you get into the game, you don't see it as you killing people. It's just like it's just this puzzle. It's just this puzzle that is represented by you like garroting people in the throat. And it's like maybe that's dark and like fucked up, and maybe it's just like it's how humans are. And it's like it's like a Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Indeed, and I have to say, it is my greatest desire in life now that someone from the Hitman team hears this podcast and puts on like the box of the season 1. It's a Beautiful Murder Flower. Sean Chapman, the Weekly Stuff podcast. That is my goal in life.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, it really is.
So you want to do a quick recap of our top 10s? Go back and forth and do the list because it's been like 3 hours since we started. People got
a lot of games to talk about.
Yeah. So all right, let's go ahead and start with my number 10. My number 10 was Kirby Planet Robobot.
My number 10 was Gundam Breaker 3.
My number 9 was Overwatch.
My number 9 was Thumper.
My number 8, Fire Emblem If.
My number 8, The Last Guardian.
My number 7, Forza Horizon 3.
My number 7, The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine.
Number 6, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
My number 6, also Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
Number 5, I Am Setsuna.
Number 5, Dark Souls 3.
Number 4, Doom.
Number 4, Uncharted 4, A Thief's End.
Number 3, Uncharted 4, A Thief's End.
Number 3, Digimon Story, Cyber Sleuth.
Number 2, Final Fantasy 15.
Number 2, Doom.
Number 1, Digimon Story, Cyber Sleuth.
Fucking yes, and my number 1 is Hitman.
All right, and that's our top 10 for the year.
Yep.
All right, so...
Oh, this is weird. I just scrolled up on my list, and there's another game here. It just has the number 0 next to it, and I think it's written in Japanese. It says Persona 5? Oh, Persona 5. I played Persona 5 this year. That's right. I did play that.
So let's explain. You are specifically holding back main top 10 placement for next year.
Yes. So Persona 5 is the best game that came out this year, and I'm not just saying that because I love Persona. It is like legitimately...
Yes.
It's really good.
Of course. I haven't played it. I know this to be true.
But since I played it in Japanese, and it feels weird to sort of just like put a game on the list that like you like reasonably could not even have really played, other than Gundam Breaker 3 is it's almost the exact same scenario. But regardless of that,
did have an English translation though.
Yes,
you're saying, right?
Yes, yeah. You can just import Gundam Breaker 3 with English. But yeah, so Persona 5, I have felt like it's going to be in real consideration for next year's list, and we can talk about it together and have it sort of compete for next year. But it felt wrong just sort of ignoring it. And the way that Persona came to this podcast in the first place was me putting it as my number 0 game of the year that I played that, fucking like 2012 or
2012, yeah.
And because,
it was the first year-end podcast we did as the Weekly Stuff podcast.
Yes, and what a year it was. My life was changed. Our lives were changed. And and originally my plan, when I first started playing Persona 5, my original plan was to reveal that I had played through the whole game in this exact way, and I just couldn't do that.
Thank you for not being that big of a dick.
I couldn't, it was almost like probably like 30% of the reason why I went through all the effort to start playing the game in the first place was because I had the idea to do that, and it was so funny to me, the idea, that I was like, I have to actually do that. And then when I started playing the game, it was so good that I was like, there are two things. It was like, one, I can't not talk about this. I have to bring this up. I have to find a dickish way to bring it up on the podcast. But then the other thing was like, I would feel too bad. Like, it would have been like,
would have ruined my night.
It would have been brutal to reveal the game that way. But yes, Persona 5 is appropriately my number 0 game. It is empty yet holds infinite possibility.
Yep, it's like the Fool.
Yes, so next year we'll have to have a real talk on Persona 5. But just
it's gonna consume 2017, I think.
Yep, for sure.
All right, I mean, we're getting a new Digimon game next year. We're getting a new Persona. We're getting a new Doctor Who.
Like this podcast is getting fucking rebooted next year. Like
pretty much.
It's intense.
It's intense, yeah. All right, so let's do some superlatives.
Because
these are fun. So, Sean, these are specifically my picks, but I think you're going to like a lot of these, and I'm excited to hear if you have like a specific pick for some of these.
All right, I'm excited to hear what you came up with.
Some of these I know you're going to like a lot. So, we're starting with a simple one, soundtrack of the year.
Yeah.
I talked about this, but you could have so many choices, and I'm interested if you have a thought on this. I always have a winner and a runner-up for these. And my winner is I Am Setsuna, composed by Tomoki Miyoshi. If you have not played this game, I am serious. This is not an ironic thing or anything. This is the soundtrack of the year to me. And my runner-up is Final Fantasy XV, Yoko Shimomura hitting that one out of the fucking park. And hey, if you consider that game technically has 14 other Final Fantasy soundtracks in it, it's really the soundtrack of the year.
It's got the Final Fantasy 1 and 3 soundtrack in it, so yes, it is. But.
Yeah. So those are my two in terms of number one and runner-up for soundtrack of the year. Do you have another thought on that?
Yeah, I would say my soundtrack of the year would be Doom, probably.
Okay.
And it was one of the things when I watched the No Clip documentary and they covered the music stuff, and just hearing some of that music again, and like seeing the way that composer had to like do all this crazy shit of like putting synthesizers through like weird old 70s guitar pedals and stuff, so like get all these bizarre sounds. It made me like realize how much artistry also went into that music, because I think a lot of times you forget that like it's not just classical music is not the only kind of music that like all this like beautiful talent goes into.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I love the Doom soundtrack. I love how it manifests in the game. I'd also say a runner-up, because it's a weird thing, and I would never listen to this as just a soundtrack, but it's kind of, for me, I kind of can't not mention it, is Thumper, because it is a music-driven game, and it's like, I feel like I would have a heart attack if I just listened to it, but it is like the percussive soundtrack of that game is really incredible. Yeah. And I also wanted, I don't think it's one of the best soundtracks of the year, but I realized, looking at this, I forgot to mention, I love the music in The Last Guardian as well. It's like, not quite at that top level, but it is a really good soundtrack, and it helps. It's a very minimalist soundtrack, and I think that works well for that game.
Yeah. But there were so many this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of great music.
All right, for character of the year, so this is like specifically like diegetic character.
Yeah.
I have a tie. I could not break this one.
Okay.
Because they're very different. And it is Ethan the Robot from Infinite Warfare.
Yeah, Ethan's so good.
And for me, Kyoko Kuremi from Digimon Story. I understand Nokia for you, totally. But Kyoko was like my entry point into that game. The arc she takes is crazy. My favorite, like, badass moment in that game is a Kyoko moment.
Yeah.
And you know what it is if you've played it. And the ending is so much more poignant than a game called Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth should be. And it revolves around you and Kyoko. And I love it to fucking death.
Yeah.
So that's my character of the year. We already know yours is Nokia.
Yeah.
So
I will give a runner-up, a surprise upset. My runner-up is the Doom Marine from Doom.
There you go, sure.
largely because there is no reason for them to have given him this like really kind of effective, simplistic character, but like the way that they get so much character across from this, like just from like first person animations, is an amazing accomplishment. It's just one of those little sort of like, spices on top of Doom that kind of like makes the whole magic of it work. Yep. And so I think it's something that I don't want to go unappreciated about what the kind of the work they did in that game.
Next, I have Performance of the Year. So this is like vocal performance. Yeah. And I did not split these by gender like actor, actress, but both of these wound up being women. My main winner would be Emily Rose as Elena from Uncharted 4.
Yeah.
No question to me when I started thinking about it. I think that is the vocal performance of 2016. And also the physical performance because it's all mocap. But what Elena brings to that game and what Emily Rose does in bringing that character around kind of full circle. I mean, fuck, if it was just... it's a Bandicoot. That alone would be up there. But, I mean, all the stuff in the second half of that game when she kind of re-enters and, her love for Nate going against her wanting Nate not to give in to his worst self. And But she is also more than just defined by her husband. And I think it's one of the great characters in the history of gaming. And it would be easy to give Nolan North another accolade for this, but he's got enough. Emily Rose stole the show this time. That's my number one there.
Yeah.
And my runner-up... I thought long and hard about this, different possibilities. But this one, when it hit me, I was like, of course. And this is Jane Perry as Diana in Hitman. You're the voice in your ear.
That was what I was going to say!
Yes?
That is literally, I was going to put her on mine!
Really?
That's amazing!
Yes. Because I think it's so obvious you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
But to me... Hitman works. Like, the thing that ties it all together is that voice in your ear, Diana, your, like, handler, talking to you, because she has such a perfect, dry delivery, and it's a character that could go wrong so easily. Like, the tone of that game could be really out of whack if you did not have Diana as perfect as she is. But I think, like, my favorite parts of that game is you do something crazy, and Diana just wryly comments on it.
Yes.
She makes that game work.
Yeah, I'm really happy because that was literally what I was going to bring up.
Nice.
I will bring to those just sort of off the top of my head. I mean, like it's specifically saying performance. I gotta give a shout out to my boy Trico from The Last Guardian. It's a different kind of thing, but like it is the thing of that game, and it feels so real, and the animation work in that is remarkable. And it, like, even if it is not literally like a performance by an actor, it is a performance created by artists, and it's beautiful, amazing kind of thing. And so Trico, and then tied with Trico because she's never a runner-up in my heart, Miyuki Suwashiro as Aranea in Final Fantasy 15. Just keep this joke going.
Okay. Writing of the year.
Okay, yeah.
Call of Duty Infinite Warfare wins that one for me.
Yeah.
If I had to pick a writing of the year. You could give this to Uncharted 4, but it's another one where it's like Naughty Dog has enough of those.
Yeah.
So Call of Duty Infinite Warfare came out of nowhere. The fact that it's the same guy, Brian Bloom, who wrote the game and plays the main character, Nick Reyes, is kind of a cool just double hitter there. And I think the writing in that game is just some of the best you'll ever see in a video game. But for my runner-up, I have something very different, but something very fun I have not gotten to mention yet. And my runner-up for writing of the year is Paper Mario Color Splash.
Right, yeah.
Because this is a game that isn't perfect, and I actually did not ever wind up finishing this game because it's fucking long, for one. But what I played of it, I really loved, even if the battle system is kind of a stain on the game and not the best part of it by any means. What kept me going through that game, in addition to the beautiful artwork and some of the fantastic imagination behind the level design, is consistently the writing in Paper Mario Color Splash is so surprising and so fun and joyous and so self-aware, and there are such clever things, like where the game... There's a level that is in a haunted mansion, and the game just turns into a crazy sort of horror version of itself for a couple hours there, and you're rescuing all these, or not rescuing, but you're saving all these ghost toads that are in different rooms in the house, and just the level of pun work in this game, it needs a shout out. This is a game that, even when it has some gameplay deficiencies, good God does it coast by on some fantastic writing.
Awesome.
So that's my runner-up there.
Yeah, I would add to that The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine,
okay.
For obvious reasons, but it is I just think about some of the conversations that are in that game and stuff, that it is just the most superlative, sort of naturalistic writing in a fantasy setting. It's just the kind of stuff that they're so brilliant at. And it is like the last conversation in the sort of the main storyline of that game between Geralt and Regis is unbelievable. So, yeah.
Nice. Art direction of the year. I went with Final Fantasy 15. I think just driving through that world and seeing like the crater and the big arcs of like rock through that world and the Rock of Ravito off in the distance, and even down to the character designs, which I think are the best things Tetsuya Nomura has ever done, and just the general aesthetic of that world holds together so well in ways that it sometimes it shouldn't. I love the art direction in that game. But my runner-up in a very different setting is the game Virginia, which I think on an art direction level nailed the aesthetic it was going for, but also didn't feel like a cheap rehash of that aesthetic, which is a very sort of David Lynchian kind of thing. But for a video game to do something like that with that eye for detail, that is definitely one I have to consider for something like that.
Yeah. I would say for mine, my winner for best art direction would be The Last Guardian. Also, that just like the design of the tower that you are in, and just like that world, and like sometimes like you get a couple of through cutscenes kind of brief glimpses of what like the world is outside of this sort of tower area you're trapped in, and like that like the way the boy looks and his clothes and all that stuff is so sort of evocative of the kind of like the world he comes from and the life he has lived. And then just the Trico himself, that design and the design of sort of all the different animal influences that come together into him are so interesting. And the game opens with one of my favorite sort of like opening title sequences in a game I've ever seen, which is just this sort of like panning shot over sort of like what like looks like almost like a biology textbook or something of all these different highly detailed drawings of different animals. And like it starts with like normal animals and then starts slowly sort of like becoming like, oh, it's a unicorn and it's a griffin, and then it arrives at Trico, and like that sort of like the design of the life in the game, and then the sort of very sterile environments are really well done. And then I would give my runner-up would be to Inside. That I think also has some similar qualities in its art design in a different way to The Last Guardian. But the way that world starts out so normal but dark and oppressive, and then just becomes more surreal, and the kind of creatures that you meet along the way, then ultimately culminating into whatever the fuck the abject flesh thing was. Like,
that's great.
Like that is a game that is sort of built, whose story is built on its art design. So,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. I almost felt like it was too obvious for that to me, but yeah, no, it's up there.
I mean, I feel like I can make that choice because you had I'm not really putting that next to Final Fantasy 15 because you have Final Fantasy 15 covered, so I don't need to worry about it.
No worries.
It on mine.
Sound design of the year, I considered not even mentioning because it's so fucking obvious. Yeah. But we might as well beat the drum for Doom again.
Yeah.
Of course, that is sound design of the year. To me, an easy runner-up is Call of Duty Infinite Warfare.
Yeah.
I think those two, I mean, it's kind of obvious that those are the top two, but specifically with Doom, it's the interplay between the music and the sonic atmosphere and the sound effects and the way the music goes in and out. I have never seen an interplay of music and game sound design mechanics as deep as Doom, and it is a huge component of why that game works as well as it does. So no other game this year, I think, was as driven by its sound design other than like maybe a rhythm game like Thumper, where you have to be able to...
Yeah, I almost wouldn't even call that sound design at some point.
You really can't.
A different thing.
So... definitely, I think that one gets it. Are there any other ones we would mention for sound design?
I feel like I just keep on saying it for all these different categories, but it's just kind of true. I would also say The Last Guardian. It's something that I think is going to get very overlooked for that game, but the sound design in that game is so exacting, from like the really sort of like manufactured sounds of all the different kind of noises that Trico makes are really important and special, but then also... like the impact of like footsteps of his footsteps in your naked footsteps on the pavement. Like there's a really specific attention to detail to how that sounds, and it adds a quality to the game. And then also the most effective sound effect of any game this year, I think, is the sound effect of pulling a spear out of Trico's side. Is just the most heart-wrenching fucking thing you have to do. Just like everything about it, but like it's specifically the moment that you finally, like after pulling on it for a while, yank it out. It's just it's kind of hard to take at some point. That's like what that kind of sound design needs to do in that moment.
Achievement in graphics.
Okay, yeah.
Tough one, although the number one for me is easy, which is Forza Horizon 3, and not just the main game, specifically Blizzard Mountain DLC. That is, to me, the achievement in graphics of 2016. Especially, my brother has a fucking, 4K PC rigged with running it in 60 frames per second 4K. It's breathtaking. But my runner-up here would be Final Fantasy 15 as well for achievement in graphics. But boy, going down that list, there's a lot of other ones I could pick.
Yeah,
here.
for me, like, I still think Uncharted 4 is the best looking game I've ever played. I think Final Fantasy 15 would probably be my runner-up, but I would take Uncharted 4 over it.
Okay, awesome. And this is an interesting one that I thought long and hard about. Genre of the year is an interesting one.
Because that was actually something I was thinking about when I was looking over my list. Is there are only 2 games on this list that are the same genre? That might be actually no, because you have a couple more JRPGs. But
I do.
Yeah, I've got Call of Duty and Doom are both first-person shooters. That's the only 2 replicated genres on my whole list.
Right. And my genre of the year is JRPGs.
Yeah.
I thought this was a really special year for that genre, and I think
in a way you don't even know yet.
Yeah. I think just kind of a rebirth for, not a rebirth maybe, but a resurgence for that genre at the moment in, you're talking about Persona 5 that's going to come here next year, but also just, I think Final Fantasy 15, Digimon Story, I Am Setsuna, so you have, big and small here, Fire Emblem Fates, that is at least 4 games on my list. It depends on how you count Fire Emblem, but it's close enough. I'd throw that on there. And then you could also just widen that to Japanese-developed games in general. 5 of my games are Japanese. 5 out of the 10. And I could go further with other ones. So that is it. I did not play as many in this genre as I would like to, but I think a runner-up would be first-person shooters. Because there's also, I haven't gotten as into Titanfall 2 or Battlefield 1, but those are also highly acclaimed and look pretty good. And I think you add that to the achievements of Infinite Warfare and Doom, that genre had a banner year.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I basically agree with all that. It is interesting to feel how well represented, basically, especially between our 2 lists, kind of every single genre is, because you've got racing game covered, I've got rhythm game covered. I would also say, even though a lot of these games did not ultimately make it on my list, it's a very sort of small niche genre, but I think the puzzle genre had a big thing this year in a lot of different ways. One is The Witness, which is a game that we didn't really talk about because it did not quite make it on my list, though I do really like The Witness a lot, and that's a fascinating sort of different kind of puzzle game. And then we also had Inside, which is essentially a puzzle game, and The Last Guardian, that is also essentially a puzzle game. And those are just kinds of games that you don't usually get a lot of each year, and usually if you do get them, they're okay but not amazing. And I feel like this is a year that this small little kind of basic fundamental genre in games got a good amount of representation and a very varied amount of representation that you usually don't see.
You're also just seeing so much blending of genres. What is Overwatch? No one can say. Uncharted 4 has big puzzle sections, but also shooting sections and timing sections and
stuff in it.
So it's got everything. Final Fantasy 15 is a JRPG, but it is completely rewriting what that genre is, for better and for worse. So many on here you could write about. Doom and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare are definitely first-person shooters, but they also, I think, kind of blow the doors off what that genre can be.
Yeah.
So genre itself is a thing to consider this year because it kind of went all over the place.
Absolutely, yeah. It was.
But, man, we had more variety across those lists than I even thought we might. Because we had actually very few games shared between our 2 lists, which is surprising because we played most of the same games, or a lot of them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it just goes to show how strong this year of games was, that it's we both played fucking 20 games or something, and then half of our lists are not even shared.
Yeah, my number 2 and your number 1 are not on our respective lists.
Yeah.
It's a crazy year. So much good stuff. It's been a pleasure to cover it all with you, Sean.
Yeah.
And for you guys, the audience. This has been a great year, I think, for the podcast. We have done, I think, 43 episodes, which is the second most we've ever done in one year, behind 2013, where we had, I think, 50, because we doubled up some weeks.
Right, yeah.
But we did it. We really, I think, kept it weekly this year. We covered so many fun things. You and I remember, off the air, went into this year thinking, no Doctor Who, Persona got delayed, all this stuff, we're going to have to, fill time, right?
Yeah, we're going to have to try to find some, weird legacy podcasts about, re-going back to, top 10 video games and doing new lists and stuff like that.
And we never did. We just...
Yeah, we had this whole plan at the beginning of the year of, I have, a half-made list of, old Doctor Who episodes to go back to do another podcast, and we just never found the time to do it, even if we wanted to.
I kind of want a slow period where we could do some of those things.
Yeah.
We never had it this year, and I think it was a really fun year to be podcasting.
Yeah.
I mean... horrible year for the world, but we had a lot to talk about for our podcast.
Yeah, it's a strange fucking year. I think it goes to show that this is the only year we have ever done the wrapped up podcast was just top 10 video games. It's always been like top 10 or maybe top 5 video games and like TV shows and movies. And this is just like, nope. Like, we could not fucking talk about anything else on this podcast if we wanted to.
Yeah, maybe our first episode back in the new year, we'll talk about some of those other things. But for now, top 10 video games. It was great. This is it for us in 2016.
Yeah.
We'll be back in the new year to talk about the Doctor Who Christmas special.
Doctor Who's finally back. Light is coming back to our planet, Jonathan.
Yes. And so many other things. January has Gravity Rush 2 and a new Digimon game. February has that Horizon Zero Dawn game. It looks so good.
Yeah.
March has the Nintendo Switch, apparently. With maybe a new Mario game, for fuck's sake. April's got Persona. It's going to be a crazy year from the word go, and I'm looking forward to it.
I can't wait until we can talk about the best game of 2016 in 2017. That's where I'm at right now.